See, Silas Crowder didn't just want to ruin Gideon Rusk. See, he wanted to humiliate him first. So when the train from St. Louis pulled into Red Hollow on a gray October morning in 1883, Silas was already there, standing near the platform with his thumbs hooked in his vest pockets and a smile that belonged on something cold-blooded. See, he watched the woman step down from the passenger car with a single trunk and a face that hadn't yet learned to hide its hope. See, then he nodded to the boy he'd paid 50 cents that morning, and the boy ran forward and tied a bright red freight tag to the handle of her trunk before she could stop him. See, useless goods, written in thick black ink, big enough for the whole platform to read. See, people laughed. Not all of them, but enough. If you were standing on that platform, if that had been tied to your things, in front of strangers, in a town where you knew nobody, what would you have done? See, this is the story of Mara Whitlock. See, a woman sent west specifically to fail, and what she did instead. See, if this kind of story moves you the kind where one stubborn woman refuses to become what someone else decided, she was hit that subscribe button right now, because we put out stories exactly like this every week. See, drop your city or country in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. See, and if you stay until the end, I promise you won't regret it. See, hit that like button too, because that's the only way the algorithm knows this story deserves to be seen. See now, let's go back to that platform. See, Mara Whitlock was 30 years old, and she had learned through experience rather than philosophy that the world was not particularly interested in making things easy for women who had no husband, see, no inheritance, and no convenient brother to stand behind. See, she had spent the last 4 years of her life managing her father's cattle records in a drafty house outside of Davenport, Iowa, watching him get sick, watching him get sicker. See, and then watching the neighbors come with their condolences and their quiet appraisals of everything on the property that might be worth something. See, her father, Henry Whitlock, had been a decent man and a mediocre businessman. See, what he left her was $112, a chest of winter clothes, and a working knowledge of cattle physiology that no one in Davenport had any particular interest in hearing from a woman of 30 with no immediate marriage prospects. See, she wasn't desperate. Exactly. Desperate implies panic, and Mara had moved past panic somewhere around the time her father's creditors came for the farm equipment. See, what she was, by the time she signed the bridal contract with the Consolidated Western Marriage Agency of St. Louis, was practical. She had thought it through the same way she'd thought through cattle feeding schedules and winter hay calculations. See, she needed a situation. A ranching situation would use skills she already had. See, the agency had a listing for a Montana cattle rancher who needed a capable partner. See, she had packed her trunk carefully, sold everything she couldn't carry, and boarded the train with her $112 tucked into her boot. See, the train to Montana took 4 days. Mara spent most of it sitting by the window watching the country change, which it did dramatically and without apology. See, Iowa went flat, then flatter, then the flatness broke open into something wilder and more honest. See, she ate sparingly. She slept in short stretches. She rehearsed, without meaning to, the first thing she would say to the rancher, named in her contract a man called Gideon Rusk. See, she had imagined a few versions of him. A tired man. See, a lonely man. A man who needed someone organized and unsentimental who could do real work alongside him. See, she had not spent much time imagining him as handsome or charming, because that wasn't what she'd signed the contract for. See, she had signed it because Iron Mesa Ranch in Red Hollow, Montana, ran cattle on 2,000 acres, and that was enough to build something real if both people worked at it seriously. See, what she had not imagined. See, not even in the darker corners of the night when the train rocked and the other passengers snored, and she stared at the ceiling, wondering if she was making a catastrophic mistake, what she had absolutely not imagined was the red tag. See, the boy came at her fast, the way children do when they've been told to hurry, and the tag was tied to her trunk handle before she even understood what was happening. See, she heard the sound of it, the slap of paper against leather, and looked down and read the words without comprehending them for a full 2 seconds. See, useless goods. Her first reaction, and she would never tell anyone this, was almost amusement. See, it was so specific. Someone had taken the time to write those words. See, someone had considered the options damaged goods would have been the expected insult, the routine one, and had chosen useless instead. See, as if worthlessness was the worst charge of the two. See, as if the cruelest thing you could say about a person wasn't that they were broken, but that they simply didn't matter. See, then she heard the laughter. It wasn't a crowd. It was 4 or 5 men near the station door, and a woman who covered her mouth with her hand like the laugh surprised her, and a station attendant who looked away when Mara caught his eye. See, but it was enough. Enough to make the back of her neck go hot and her jaw tighten in a way that she recognized as the early warning sign of something she would regret saying. See, she untied the tag herself slowly, without looking at any of them. See, she was still holding it when she heard boots on the platform boards. See, Gideon Rusk was not what she'd imagined, but then she hadn't imagined much. See, he was taller than she'd thought she'd expected, a compact man, weather-worn and economical, the way she imagined most ranchers who were struggling financially. See, Gideon was broad-shouldered and unhurried in the way he moved, with the kind of dark circles under his eyes that come from not enough sleep over not enough months. See, his hat was good or had been good once. His coat was not. See, he stopped a few feet from her. He looked at the tag in her hand. See, he looked at the men near the door, one by one, slowly enough that they stopped laughing. See, then he looked at Mara. "Miss Whitlock," he said. It wasn't a question. See, Mr. Rusk. She kept her voice level. She was proud of that afterward. See, he took off his hat. "I owe you an apology." "For what exactly?" She held the tag up slightly. "See, were you the one who wrote this?" "No." He said it simply, without rushing to fill the space after it with explanation. See, she studied him. "Then who did?" He glanced toward the door. See, she followed his gaze and saw, for the first time, Silas Crowder, though she didn't know his name yet. See, she saw a man in an expensive suit who was watching all of this with the relaxed attention of someone watching a play he'd already read. See, he was smiling. Not at her, at Gideon. She filed that image away immediately without knowing why. See, Gideon looked back at her. "Someone who wanted to cause trouble," he said. "See, it won't reflect on you. Not from anyone who matters." "See, that's not what I asked," she said. He paused. "No," he said, "it isn't." See, she waited. "His name is Silas Crowder," Gideon said, quieter now. "See, he controls most of the trade coming in and out of Red Hollow." "See, he and I have had disagreements." "Disagreements," she repeated. "See, he wants my ranch," Gideon said. "He's been working toward it for about 2 years." See, Mara looked back at the man in the expensive suit. See, Silas Crowder had moved slightly, just enough to put himself more in her line of sight. See, he tipped his hat at her, slow and deliberate with that same cold smile. See, it was the kind of hat tip that wasn't a greeting. See, it was a statement. "I see you. You don't scare me. See, you're nothing." She held the red tag in both hands and looked at it again. "See, Mr. Rusk," she said. Gideon. She folded the tag and put it in her coat pocket. "See, I'd like to see the ranch." He blinked. She thought she saw something shift behind his eyes, not relief, exactly, but something adjacent to it. "See, I should tell you first," he said. "The agency I didn't arrange to send for you. See, I want you to know that. What was done without my knowledge or agreement. See, you are not obligated to. I heard you." She picked up the handle of her trunk. "See, are we going by wagon or by horse?" He stared at her for a moment. "See, wagon." "Good." She nodded toward the street. "Shall we?" See, he carried her trunk. She noticed that. See, he didn't ask the station boy to do it, and he didn't make a show of it either, just picked it up and walked. See, she walked beside him, not behind, and Silas Crowder watched them go with an expression that she would later understand was the face of a man recalculating. See, the wagon ride to Iron Mesa took an hour and 40 minutes. See, Mara spent most of it watching the land. Gideon spent most of it trying to decide what to say, which she could tell from the way he started sentences and then stopped. See, you should know it's not. The land looks dry, she said. See, he stopped. What? The grass near that creek. It's been overgrazed. See how the roots are exposed? You won't get good growth there next spring unless it rests. See, he looked where she was pointing. He said nothing for a moment. See, you know cattle land? My father kept records on a beef operation for 15 years. See, I kept most of those records myself from the time I was 14. See, I know what overgrazed land looks like. Another silence. See, we've had a hard season, I can see that. He glanced at her sideways. See, you're not what I expected. You didn't expect anything, she said. See, you didn't know I was coming. He had the decency to almost smile at that. See, fair enough. Iron Mesa Ranch announced itself with a gate that hung slightly crooked on its post. See, Mara noticed it. She noticed the fence line that needed work on the east side, and the water trough that was sitting low for October, and the hay supply stacked under a tarp that wasn't quite large enough to cover it adequately against serious snow. See, she noticed all of it, not because she was looking for problems, but because she had spent 15 years being trained to look at a ranch the way other people look at a ledger, searching for where the numbers didn't add up. See, the numbers at Iron Mesa did not add up in several places. See, there were 3 hands in the yard when they arrived. See, a heavyset man named Dolph who looked at Mara with flat, unfriendly eyes. See, a younger one named Cal who at least had the politeness to nod. See, and an older man they called Hector who was sitting on the fence mending a bridle and didn't look up at all. See, she's staying. Dolph said to Gideon, not to Mara, to Gideon. See, that's Miss Whitlock's decision, Gideon said. Dolph looked at Mara then, with the particular expression of a man who has already made up his mind. See, ranch is short enough without feeding extra mouths. See, Mara set her bag down. What's your daily hay portion for the weaker calves? See, Dolph blinked. What? Your weakest calves. How much are they getting? See, he looked at Gideon again, as if expecting Gideon to interpret her. See, Gideon said nothing. Same as the others, Dolph said finally. See, Mara nodded slowly. That's why you're losing them. She said it matter-of-factly, not with any edge in it. See, weaker calves can't compete for feed with the stronger ones. See, they need to be separated and managed on their own schedule, or you'll keep losing them through winter. See, Dolph stared at her. Cal looked at his boots. Hector, on the fence, finally lifted his head. See, who told you that? Dolph said. 15 years of cattle records, Mara said. See, may I see the herd? The herd was in worse shape than she'd expected, but not irreversible. See, that was the honest assessment she made while walking the pasture with Gideon that first afternoon, while the light went thin and cold around them, and the cattle moved away from her in the way animals do around someone unfamiliar. See, she counted 7 calves that were visibly underweight. See, 3 of them had the dull coat and slowed movement that she associated with animals that had maybe 2 weeks of good weather left in them before their systems would start to give up. See, she didn't say that to Gideon. She said, these 7 need immediate separation. See, we don't have a separate pen ready, then we build one. See, he looked at her. You've been here 6 hours, I know that. She looked back at the calves. See, do you want them to live or not? He was quiet for a long moment. The way she would come to recognize was his way of processing things he hadn't anticipated. See, then he said, I'll have Cal start on the fence posts in the morning. See, tonight would be better, she said. He said nothing for a moment. See, then, tonight it is. She walked back toward the calves to get a better look at the worst, a small reddish bull calf that was standing apart from the others with its head lower than it should be. See, she approached slowly. The calf turned its head toward her without moving away, which in a young animal was not a good sign. See, it meant the energy for fear had already been spent. See, she put her hand against its neck and counted. Behind her, she heard Gideon call for Cal. See, that was the moment she started to understand that Gideon Rusk was not a man who needed to be argued with at length. See, he needed one credible reason, and once he had it, he moved. See, she filed that away too. She slept that first night in a room that had been a storage room. Not long ago, she could tell from the grain dust in the corner and the hook on the wall that had held tools. See, the bed was narrow and the window had a draft. See, she lay on her back in her coat because the blanket wasn't quite enough, and she stared at the ceiling and thought, with the same clear-eyed practicality she'd applied to everything else, about the man in the expensive suit at the train station. See, Silas Crowder. He had arranged for her to be sent here. See, not Gideon, Silas. That meant her arrival, the red tag, the public humiliation, the whole spectacle of it had been designed. See, which meant Silas had a reason to want both of them embarrassed. See, or both of them broken. She thought about that for a long time. See, then she got up, lit the lamp at the small table, opened the ledger she'd found on the kitchen shelf with Gideon's permission, and started reading the ranch's financial records from the beginning. See, she read until 2 in the morning. By the time she stopped, she had a clear picture of what Iron Mesa owed, what Iron Mesa had, and the exact date when everything would run out if nothing changed. See, it was closer than Gideon had told her, possibly closer than he knew. See, she closed the ledger. She turned off the lamp. See, she lay back down in her coat in the dark and felt the particular stillness of Montana night pressing in against the window, a silence so complete it had weight to it, different from anything she'd known in Iowa. See, she thought about the train ticket in her bag. She thought about the platform in St. See, Louis, where she'd signed the contract, and the agent who'd spoken in smooth, reassuring sentences about opportunity and partnership. See, she thought about Silas Crowder's smile, that specific smile. See, the one that said he'd already won. She put the ticket in the back of her mind and went to sleep. See, she did not dream about leaving. She was up before anyone else the next morning. See, not because she was trying to prove something. She simply couldn't sleep past the first gray light. See, it had always been that way, even in Iowa, even in the house where there was nothing urgent waiting. Her body refused to waste daylight. And Montana's early mornings had a cold clarity to them that made lying in bed feel dishonest. See, she built the kitchen fire herself, found the coffee tin, and had a pot going by the time she heard Gideon's boots in the hallway. See, he stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the fire and then at her, and she could see him recalibrating again that same quiet adjustment she'd noticed the day before. See, the one that happened behind his eyes when something didn't fit the shape he'd been expecting. See, you didn't have to do that, he said. I know. She poured him a cup and set it on the table. See, sit down. I went through your ledger last night. See, he sat. He picked up the cup. He did not look surprised that she'd gone through the ledger, which she appreciated. See, a man who got defensive about his own numbers was a man who already knew how bad they were and couldn't face it. See, Gideon just looked tired. And he said, your banknote comes due in 11 weeks. She sat across from him with her own cup. See, you have enough cash to cover roughly 4 of those weeks if nothing else breaks down. See, your store credit at Hendrick's Supply has been running since August, and it's sitting at a number that should concern you more than it apparently does. See, he stared into his coffee. I know the number. Do you know that Silas Crowder holds a partial interest in Hendrick's? See, his head came up. Slowly, where did you read that? See, I didn't. I'm asking. She kept her voice even. Because the terms on that store account changed in March, and the margin increase is unusual for a long-term customer. See, someone pressured Hendrick into tightening the terms. See, that kind of pressure usually has a face attached to it. See, Gideon set his cup down. He was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence she could hear the wind picking up outside, moving through the gaps in the window frame. See, you got all that from one night with the ledger, he said. See, it wasn't a question. My father owed money for most of my childhood, she said. See, I learned to read debt the way other people read weather. See, you can see it coming from a distance if you know what to look for. See, he rubbed the back of his neck. Outside, one of the hands was moving through the yard. She could hear the crunch of boots on frost. See, I should have caught that, he said, half to himself. See, you had other things to watch. The cattle, the land, the hands. She paused. See, how many calves did you lose last winter? 9. See, and the winter before? He hesitated. 11. She nodded slowly. See, she had already guessed the number was somewhere in that range from the way the ledger showed consistent losses in the early months of each year. See, the 7 I flagged yesterday, if we separate them today and start a controlled feeding schedule, I think we can get most of them through. See, I'm not promising all 7, but most. Cal started on the pen last night, like you said. Gideon looked at her across the table. See, he worked until it was too dark to see. She felt something small and unexpected at that, not gratitude exactly, but something adjacent to it. See, good, he's not the one you have to worry about, Gideon said carefully. See, Dolph, she said. Dolph has been with this dish for 6 years. See, he is not flexible in his thinking. I know the type. She stood and refilled both cups without asking. See, he doesn't have to like me. He has to do his job. See, Gideon watched her. It's not that simple when a man's been running things a certain way for 6 years and someone new tells him he's been doing it wrong. See, I'm not telling him he's been doing it wrong, she said, sitting back down. See, I'm telling him there's a better way. Those are different things. See, it's subtle, but it matters. Gideon almost smiled. See, it was a very small almost. You've managed difficult men before. See, I've managed difficult people, she said. Men, creditors, county assessors who showed up with clipboards after my father died. See, they're all essentially the same. They want to feel like the decision was theirs. See, he was quiet for a beat. See, then he said, see, without looking at her, see, why are you still here? See, Miss Whitlock. See, she looked at him directly. Mara, he met her eyes then. See, you saw this ranch yesterday. You read the ledger last night. See, you know what you walked into, so why are you still here? See, she thought about the train ticket in her bag. She thought about Silas Crowder's hat tip and the red tag and the sound of people laughing on the platform. See, she thought about what she'd left behind in Iowa, which was nothing she could return to. See, because leaving would mean he won, she said simply. See, Gideon looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. See, not enthusiastically, just a man acknowledging a fact. See, all right, he said. Show me what you need for the separation pen. See, the pen took the better part of the morning to finish. See, Cal worked without complaint, which she was grateful for. He was young, maybe 22, with the eager efficiency of someone who simply liked having a clear task in front of him. See, Mara worked alongside him, not directing from a distance. See, actually working, which she could see surprised him. See, you done this before? Cal asked at one point, watching her drive a post with more accuracy than he'd expected. See, my father's operation was small, which meant everyone did everything. See, Cal nodded. He seemed to be processing something. After a while, he said, in a quieter voice, Dolph says you'll be gone inside of 2 weeks. See, she kept driving the post. What do you say? Cal considered this seriously, the way young men do when they're genuinely trying to form an opinion rather than repeat someone else's. See, I say those calves are in bad shape and somebody ought to do something about it. See, she stopped and looked at him. He met her eyes steadily. See, she decided then that Cal was worth keeping on her side, not for political reasons, but because he was fundamentally honest, and honest people were useful in a way that agreeable people never quite were. See, then let's finish this pen, she said. Dolph appeared around midday. See, he stood at the fence line watching them work for a few minutes, with his arms crossed, and his expression set in the permanent, disapproving squint she was already starting to think of as his natural face. See, he didn't say anything for a while. She didn't acknowledge him until he spoke. See, this pen won't hold in a hard wind, he said finally. See, she looked at the pen. She looked at Dolph. You're right, she said. See, the east-facing posts need to be deeper. Will you show Cal the depth you'd use? See, Dolph blinked. He hadn't expected agreement. It knocked him off his footing, she could see it, and he stood there for a moment, not knowing quite where to go with his argument when the argument had been accepted. See, fine, he said after a pause. He came through the fence and took the post driver from Cal without a word, and drove the next post 18 inches deeper than the previous ones, which was actually correct. See, thank you, Mara said. Dolph grunted. He handed the driver back to Cal and walked away. See, but he did not leave immediately. She noticed him linger at the edge of her vision for another 10 minutes, watching. See, not hostile exactly. Evaluating. She recognized it because she did the same thing herself. See, by afternoon, the 7 calves were in the separation pen with their own water, their own salt, and a feeding schedule she'd written out on a scrap of paper that she tacked to the post. See, she stood back and looked at the worst one, the small reddish bull calf, and watched it move toward the water trough on its own. See, Gideon came to stand beside her. Think it'll make it? See, ask me in a week, she said. The first week at Iron Mesa established a rhythm that nobody had planned. See, Mara was up before light. She checked the separation pen first thing every morning, then went through the main herd, then came back to the kitchen to go over whatever numbers were bothering her. See, Gideon worked from before sunup to after dark the way ranchers do in October, when winter is not a distant possibility, but an immediate tactical problem. See, Cal did whatever needed doing, which was considerable. See, Dolph did his work competently and kept his opinions to himself with increasing effort, which she recognized as the closest thing to progress she was going to get from him in the short term. See, Hector, the older hand who'd ignored her on the first day, turned out to be the most interesting of the 3. See, he spoke rarely, worked steadily, and had a particular gift with sick animals that she discovered on the 3rd morning when she found him in the separation pen before she arrived. See, checking each calf in the methodical way of someone who had been doing it for years. See, she stopped at the pen entrance. He didn't stop what he was doing. See, Runt's eating better, he said, without turning around. See, I noticed yesterday evening. You check it in the evening too? See, yes. He turned around then and looked at her with dark, deeply lined eyes that seemed to be running some kind of internal calculation. See, he was somewhere in his 60s, she thought, though weather made it hard to judge. See, my wife used to do it that way, he said. Separate the weak ones. See, her family had a small operation in New Mexico. Mara said nothing. See, she'd learned that the right response to someone offering a small piece of themselves was to receive it without comment, because commenting either too warmly or too coolly collapsed the thing. See, she'd have said the same about the pasture, Hector added. See, he nodded toward the south field, the one you want to fence off. See, have you seen it done before, pasture rotation? Seen it work, he said. See, slow thing. Takes patience. Most things that work take patience. See, Hector nodded once and turned back to the calf. She took that as the end of the conversation. See, but from that morning forward, Hector was always at the separation pen when she arrived. See, and they would assess the animals together in a silence that was comfortable in the way of 2 people who speak the same language and don't feel the need to translate. See, it was Hector who told her about the pasture's history. See, not in one conversation but in pieces, the way he seemed to give out everything slowly in amounts he'd decided were appropriate, like rationing water. See, the south pasture had been good grazing land when Gideon's father ran the ranch. See, then came 2 hard summers, a prolonged drought, and a decision to push the same grazing land through a 3rd year without rest. See, the grass hadn't recovered, and every attempt since then to graze it moderately had stalled because the depleted root system couldn't sustain the pressure even at reduced levels. See, what Gideon hasn't done, Hector said one morning, matter-of-factly, is fence it completely and leave it alone. See, long enough to actually rest, Mara said, 6 months minimum. See, he'd need to carry the current herd on the north and east pastures through that whole period. See, Hector looked at the south field. It can be done. See, would be tight, but it can be done if the feeding's managed right. See, she thought about the 11 weeks before the banknote came due. See, 6 months of pasture rest was not a solution for 11 weeks. See, but it was a solution for next year, and the year after, and the year after that. See, it was the difference between Iron Mesa surviving this winter and Iron Mesa surviving the next 10 winters. See, those were different problems, and she was beginning to understand that nobody at this ranch had ever clearly separated them. See, they'd been fighting the immediate crisis so constantly that the long-term repair had never had space to breathe. See, she brought it to Gideon that evening after supper, when the hands had gone and the kitchen had quieted to just the sound of the fire. See, she laid it out the same way she'd laid out the financial picture directly, with numbers, without dressing it up. See, he listened without interrupting, which was his habit, and which she respected more the longer she was around him. See, when she finished, he said, "We don't have the fencing material." See, I know. I priced it. She'd been to Red Hollow for supplies that afternoon. See, if we use the wood from the old equipment shed on the north side, the one that's not structurally sound anymore, and buy the wire on credit, we can do it for significantly less. See, on credit, he repeated. From Alvarez Hardware, not from Hendricks. See, Gideon looked at her. You went around Hendricks. See, Alvarez has better terms and no connection to Silas Crowder that I can find. She paused. See, I spoke to Mr. Alvarez directly. He knows the ranch. See, he said Gideon Rusk's credit is good with him if the first payment is made within 30 days. See, he was quiet for a while. The fire popped. Outside, the wind had picked up, moving across the roof the way Montana wind does not gently. See, you negotiated that today, he said, without telling me first. See, I'm telling you now. She kept her voice level. I should have told you I was going. See, I didn't because I wasn't sure it would work, and I didn't want to raise the option until I knew it was real. See, that was a mistake, and I won't do it again. He looked at her for a long moment. See, she couldn't read what was behind it completely, but it wasn't anger. See, something more complicated than anger. All right, he said finally. See, all right, you agree, or all right, we'll discuss it further. See, all right, we start on the fence. She nodded. She started to stand, and he said, Mara. See, she stopped. You should have told me first, he said. See, not because I'd have stopped you, but because we're supposed to be making decisions for this ranch together. See, she held his gaze. You're right, she said. I'm used to working alone. See, so am I, he said. We'll both have to get over that. See, she thought about that for a moment. Then she sat back down. See, then we should go through the rest of the numbers, she said. See, together. They sat at that kitchen table until past 10 o'clock, going through every line of the ledger. See, it was the first time she'd felt genuinely useful at something she was trained for in years, and she noticed, distantly, that Gideon was easier to work with than she'd expected. See, he asked real questions. He didn't pretend to understand things he didn't understand. See, when she explained something, he listened with the focused attention of a man who intended to remember it. See, it occurred to her, somewhere around 9 o'clock, that she was not entirely miserable. See, she found that faintly alarming and pushed the thought aside to deal with later. See, the cattle buyer from Billings came through Red Hollow in the third week of October, and Gideon drove a portion of the herd into town to be assessed. See, this was standard practice buyers moved through the region in fall, and the auction price you got in November depended significantly on the impression you made in October. See, Mara went with him. She hadn't been back to Red Hollow since the train platform, and she noticed the town looking at her. See, not everyone, most people had their own business and no particular interest in her, but the eyes that did find her were doing work. See, cataloging, updating whatever they'd decided on the platform. See, she kept her chin level and walked beside Gideon to the cattle pen. See, the buyer's name was Garrett Purcell. He was a square-faced man from Billings with the particular authority of someone who spent his life assigning value to things and had stopped being uncertain about it. See, he walked through the cattle with his hands behind his back and his eyes doing quick technical assessments, the way Mara recognized from watching her father's buyers. See, he stopped at the separation pen group, the 7 calves she'd pulled out 3 weeks ago, and studied them with a slight change in expression. See, these were yours, he asked Gideon. They were, Gideon said. See, they've been on a managed feeding schedule since mid-October. See, Purcell looked at the reddish bull calf, who was now, undeniably, a different animal than he'd been at the start of the month. See, still on the smaller end. See, but moving with energy. See, coat brightening. See, carrying himself differently. See, who managed the schedule? Gideon glanced at Mara. See, Miss Whitlock. Purcell looked at her. She returned his look without deference. See, what did you do differently? He asked. Separated them from the competition, she said. See, weaker animals can't win a feeding contest against stronger ones. See, once they're on their own program, most of them come around if they have the underlying constitution for it. See, Purcell looked back at the calf. Most of them, he repeated. See, not all. 2 didn't make it, she said. I'm not going to tell you otherwise. See, he nodded slowly as if this were the correct answer. See, where'd you come from? Iowa. My father ran cattle. See. He walked on to the next animal, but she noticed his pencil moved slightly differently after that, a different notation, a different consideration. See, Gideon said nothing to her until they were walking back to the wagon. See, then he said quietly, he's never asked about feeding management before. See, in 4 years of selling to Purcell, he's never once asked. See, Mara thought about that. He might when he comes back in November. See, that's the point, Gideon said. That's exactly the point. See, Silas Crowder showed up at Iron Mesa 11 days later. See, he arrived in a good carriage with a man driving who kept his eyes forward, and he came to the front of the ranch house rather than the working yard, which told her something about what he thought this visit was. See, he was dressed as carefully as he'd been at the train station, the suit, the hat, the watch chain, and he stood waiting to be received like a man who had never once in his life waited longer than he wanted to. See, Mara was the one who opened the door. Gideon was out on the east fence, and she had not sent anyone to find him, a decision she made in the 2 seconds it took her to recognize Silas's carriage through the kitchen window. See, Silas looked at her. The cold smile appeared. Miss Whitlock, he said pleasantly. See, still here, Mr. Crowder, she said. She did not open the door wider. See, Gideon isn't in the house. No matter. I came to speak to both of you, but I can leave a message. He reached into his coat and produced a folded document with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this. See, Mr. Rusk's outstanding balance at Hendrick's Supply has been consolidated into a single note. See, effective this month. I hold that note. The terms have been adjusted. See, she took the document. She looked at it. The terms had been adjusted significantly. See, what had been a manageable store account was now structured as a demand note payable in full within 60 days, with a penalty rate on any unpaid balance that would compound into something impossible inside of 6 months. See, she kept her face still. I'll give this to Gideon. See, do. Silas's smile didn't change. I also wanted to say personally that I think you've shown remarkable fortitude in difficult circumstances. See, a woman of your background, no family, no connections in the territory, limited options, choosing to stay at a struggling ranch rather than return to more comfortable surroundings. He tilted his head slightly. See, admirable. Truly. She looked at him. She let the silence sit between them for a moment. See, is there anything else? Only that I hope Mr. Rusk understands the timeline clearly. He reached up and touched the brim of his hat, the same gesture he'd used on the platform. See, the same statement. You don't matter. Good afternoon, Miss Whitlock. See, she watched his carriage leave. She stood in the doorway until it disappeared past the gate, the one that hung slightly crooked. See, then she looked at the document again, 60 days. See, which put the payment deadline inside of a week of the banknote's own due date. See, that was not coincidence. 2 deadlines, 1 financial crisis, and now a demand note structured to make it effectively impossible to manage both simultaneously. See, if Gideon prioritized the banknote, the Hendricks note would compound into a penalty that would consume whatever recovery the banknote left. See, if he prioritized the Hendricks note, the banknote would foreclose. See, it was a trap inside a trap. She stood in the kitchen and went through it in her head for 10 minutes. See, she went through it again. She turned it around and looked at it from different angles, the way she'd learned to look at debt, not emotionally, but structurally, searching for the load-bearing point. See, there was one. It was thin, but it was there. She put the document on the table and went to find Gideon. See, he read the document at the kitchen table with the controlled expression of a man exercising real effort not to show what was happening underneath it. See, she had seen that expression before her father had worn it the morning the county assessor showed up. See, it was the expression of someone receiving information that confirms a fear they had been hoping was exaggerated. See, he bought the Hendricks account, Gideon said. Yes. See, and restructured the terms. Yes. When did this? He stopped. See, he looked up at her. You said in the first week that someone had pressured Hendricks. See, you said the margin increase was unusual. I suspected it, she said. See, I didn't know he'd take it this far. Gideon set the document down. See, he pressed both hands flat on the table. She could see the tension in his forearms. See, he's going to take the ranch. He's trying to, she said. See, he hasn't done it yet. Mara, his voice was quiet, and there was something in it she hadn't heard before, not defeat, not quite, but the thing that lives right next to defeat and sometimes gets confused with it. See, I appreciate what you've done here. I want you to know that, whatever. See, stop, she said. He looked at her. Don't say whatever comes after that, she said. See, not yet. I want to show you something. She sat down and pulled the ledger toward her. See, she had been working on something for the past 4 days since the conversation with Alvarez at the hardware store, since a piece of information she'd gathered there had settled into a back corner of her mind and been working quietly ever since. See, she turned to the page she'd been using for calculations. See, Alvarez told me that Purcell's company, the buyer from Billings, has been trying to establish a new supply agreement in this region for 2 seasons. See, they want consistent quality from a local ranch rather than going through Silas's consolidated sellers. She put her finger on the column of numbers she'd run. See, if we can present the November herd with documented quality, the calves, the weight records, the feeding protocols written out Purcell might offer a forward contract instead of a spot sale. See, Gideon stared at the numbers. A forward contract would give us income now. See, a signed contract could serve as collateral against both notes. See, not perfect collateral, but it changes the conversation with the bank significantly. See, it becomes a business with income rather than a business in default. See, he was quiet. She watched him read the numbers 3 times. See, she knew he was looking for the flaw in it, and she let him look because that was the right thing to do. See, the November herd would have to grade well, he said. See, the 7 calves we separated will be in that herd. See, the pasture work we've done on the east field has improved the grass quality for the animals grazing there. She paused. See, I've also been tracking weight gains on the main herd. See, they're up, not dramatically, but measurably. Purcell doesn't offer forward contracts lightly. See, no, she agreed. He'd have to believe in the operation. See, he'd have to believe it was going to sustain, which means the November drive would have to be. See, the best herd Iron Mesa has ever brought to market, she said. See, the silence between them lasted a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the yard. See, the fire shifted. Somewhere in the distance, one of the cattle lowed once, low and uncertain. See, we have 6 weeks, Gideon said. 6 weeks, she confirmed. See, he looked at her. Not the way he'd looked at her on the platform, when he was recalibrating her existence into his situation. See, he looked at her the way she'd seen Hector look at a sick animal that had turned a corner with a quiet recognition that something had half given up on was going to make it. See, then we'd better get to work, he said. See, the 6 weeks that followed were the hardest of her life to that point, and she had not had an easy life. See, she was up before 4 most mornings. She spent her days in the fields, tracking weight, managing the feeding schedule, monitoring the recovered pasture's progress, working alongside Cal and increasingly alongside Hector, see, and occasionally alongside Dolph, who had not exactly warmed to her, but had begun, in a minimal and grudging way, to defer to her judgment on specific cattle matters when his own experience ran out. See, she told him once, when they were assessing a cow with respiratory trouble, that a particular treatment his instinct was pushing him toward would likely make it worse. See, she told him what to do instead, and why, He did it without argument, which was as close to acceptance as she expected from him. See, the cow recovered in 5 days. Dolph didn't say anything directly. See, but 3 mornings later, she found a second blanket folded at the end of her bed. See, she had no idea how it got there. She didn't ask. Gideon, meanwhile, was fighting a parallel battle. See, he'd gone to the bank himself and presented the calculation, the forward contract possibility, the herd improvements, the documented protocols, and the bank's manager. See, a man named Forsyth, who had known Gideon for years and liked him personally even while his institution was preparing to act against him, had given Gideon 2 additional weeks on the banknote. See, Forsyth couldn't extend much further. Gideon told her that night. See, but he said the documentation, the weight records, the feeding logs, he said that was the kind of record keeping that changed a conversation. See, he said he'd seen plenty of ranchers in trouble, and none of them had walked in with that kind of paper. See, Mara absorbed this. Did he say what he needed to see in November? See, numbers, Gideon said. Real numbers. A sale that covers the note and has margin beyond it. See, then we get those numbers. It was during this period that she became aware of something happening to the ranch that she hadn't expected and couldn't entirely account for. See, it wasn't any single thing she could point to. It was more like a shift in atmosphere, a change in the quality of the air inside the operation. See, Hector sang while he worked, low and off-key, which she gathered from Cal had not been a regular occurrence. See, Cal himself began arriving early without being asked. See, even Dolph, and this was the one that surprised her most, began explaining things to Cal with a patience she hadn't seen him show before, the way experienced men do when they start to believe that what they know is worth passing on. See, she mentioned it to Gideon one evening in a rare, quiet moment. See, he thought about it for a while. Hope's different from desperation, he said finally. See, men work different when they think it might actually come to something. See, she thought about that for a long time afterward. She also thought about Silas Crowder. See, she thought about him deliberately and methodically. The way she thought about problems that needed solving rather than feelings that needed processing. See, Silas had made a specific set of moves. He had a specific goal, which was the ranch. See, he had a specific tool, which was the debt. And he had a specific assumption underlying all of it, which was that Mara Whitlock was exactly what the red tag had said. See, that assumption was the load-bearing point. The question was how to move it. See, she was still working on that when the letter arrived from a woman she hadn't heard from. In 2 years, a woman named Nora Bell, who had worked at the same marriage agency that had sent Mara west. See, the letter was short and had the careful tone of someone who had been rewriting it for a while before sending it. See, it said that Nora would be passing through Red Hollow in the first week of November, and that she had something she needed to tell Mara in person. See, something about the agency, something about why Mara had been chosen. See, Mara read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it in the pocket where she'd put the red tag on the platform. See, she went back out to check on the reddish bull calf, who was now, by any honest measure, a healthy, young animal with a coat that caught the afternoon light and a neck that had filled out in the month since she'd first pressed her hand against it and counted the slow, labored beat of a heart that was trying to decide whether to keep going. She put her hand against its neck again now, strong. Steady. No uncertainty in it at all. Good, she said quietly. The calf didn't react. It just kept eating, which was, she thought, exactly right. Nora Bell arrived on a Tuesday, which was not a market day, and she came quietly, no carriage, no announcement. Just a woman stepping off the afternoon stage with a single bag and the look of someone who had been rehearsing a conversation for weeks and was no longer certain any version of it would go well. Mara saw her from the yard. She had been helping Cal repair the water line from the north trough, and she straightened when the stage stopped and stood very still for a moment, because Nora Bell was not a person she had expected to feel anything particular about seeing. And the fact that she felt something tightening in her chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite relief surprised her. She handed Cal the wrench and walked to the road. Nora looked older. See, not dramatically, it had only been 2 years, but in the way that certain kinds of difficult knowledge age a person more efficiently than time does. See, she had the same careful posture she'd always had, the same habit of holding her bag with both hands, but the composure that had always seemed effortless on her now looked like something she was actively maintaining. See, she saw Mara and stopped. "You came," Mara said. "I said I would." Nora's voice was steadier than her eyes. "See, I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." Mara looked at her for a moment. See, there were a dozen things she could have said. Some of them were unkind and probably earned. See, she set them aside, not from generosity, but because she needed the information Nora was carrying more than she needed the satisfaction of saying them. See, "Come to the ranch," she said. "I'll make coffee." See, they sat at the kitchen table where Mara had sat with Gideon on her second morning at Iron Mesa, and Nora held her cup with both hands the way she held her bag, and Mara waited. See, she had learned, over the past 6 weeks, to be patient with the way information came. See, you couldn't drag it out of people at the rate you needed it. See, you had to give it room. "I didn't know the whole of it when I was still at the agency," Nora began. See, "I want you to understand that. I knew some of it, and I told myself the parts I knew weren't enough to. I told myself a lot of things." See, "Tell me what you know now," Mara said. Nora set down her cup. See, she looked at her hands. Silas Crowder approached the agency 11 months ago. See, he didn't do it directly. He used a man named Pruitt, who handles several of his quieter business dealings. See, Pruitt came with a proposal. He said he represented a client who needed a specific kind of match made for a rancher in Red Hollow. She paused. See, the specifications were unusual. What kind of specifications? See, he wanted a woman with no family connections in the territory. See, no wealthy relations anywhere who might provide financial assistance. See, no history of legal ownership or property that could be transferred in. Nora's jaw tightened. See, he wanted someone who, if things went badly, had nowhere to go and no one to call on. See, Mara was quiet. She had suspected something like this. The bones of it had been visible since the moment she'd understood Silas's relationship to the Hendricks account, but hearing it articulated in plain terms was different from suspecting it. See, it had a different weight, and the agency agreed, she said. See, the agency's director agreed. Nora looked up then. See, not everyone knew. I didn't know the full purpose. See, I was told it was a legitimate match, that the client wanted. I was told he wanted someone capable and self-sufficient who could manage hardship. She laughed, and it had no humor in it. See, which was technically accurate. He wanted someone who could be humiliated publicly and have no recourse, Mara said. See, yes, and the tag Nora closed her eyes briefly. See, Pruitt arranged that. The agency director allowed it. See, they knew what it was for. She opened her eyes. The idea was that if you arrived and were publicly humiliated, see, and if Gideon Rusk was publicly associated with that humiliation, if the whole town saw him as a man who'd sent for a woman worth nothing, it would damage his reputation with buyers and lenders at a time when he couldn't afford that damage. See, and if you stayed anyway, you'd be a financial burden on a ranch that was already failing. See, and if you left, she stopped. If I left, Mara said carefully, Silas had a story to tell about the kind of man Gideon was. See, that he couldn't even keep a wife, Nora said quietly. See, in 1883 in a cattle town, that has a specific meaning. See, it means a man without stability, without the kind of reliability that lenders and buyers base decisions on. See, the kitchen was very still. Outside, the wind moved across the roof. See, Mara could hear Hector in the yard, the low sound of him talking to one of the animals, the way he sometimes did when he didn't know anyone could hear. See, you said you had something to give me, Mara said. See, Nora reached into her bag and produced a folded envelope. See, the original agreement between Pruitt and the agency director. See, and a letter from the director to Pruitt, written after you arrived, confirming that the placement had gone as arranged. She slid them across the table. See, an assigned account from me. What I know, what I was told, what I suspected and didn't act on. She met Mara's eyes. See, I'm not offering it to make myself feel better. I'm offering it because you might be able to use it. See, Mara picked up the envelope. She held it without opening it. See, what do you want in exchange? Nothing. Nora's voice was flat and certain in a way that sounded like something she'd arrived at after a long argument with herself. See, I want nothing from you. You don't owe me anything, and I'm not pretending otherwise. See, Mara looked at her for a long moment. Then she opened the envelope. See, the documents were exactly what Nora had described. See, they were also, Mara recognized with the particular clarity that came from 15 years of reading financial papers. See, written in the specific way of people who were careful, but not careful enough people who documented things, because documentation made them feel legitimate. See, without considering that the same document that proved an arrangement also proved the arrangement's nature. See, Silas had paid the agency $40 to send a woman west, specifically to help destroy a man's livelihood. See, $40 to engineer public humiliation, financial pressure, and reputational damage. See, she set the papers down. You'll testify to what you know if it comes to that? See, Nora nodded, in writing or in person, both if necessary. See, Mara thought about the timing. The November drive was in 12 days. See, the forward contract negotiation with Purcell was in 9. See, the dual deadlines, the bank note, and the Hendricks demand note were converging in a way that gave her roughly 3 weeks of real maneuvering room. And that was only if nothing else went wrong between now and then. See, she folded the documents carefully and put them inside her coat. See, you should stay tonight if you can, she said. The stage back doesn't come until tomorrow morning. See, Nora blinked. She'd clearly expected something else, anger, dismissal, something more proportionate to what she'd been part of. See, I can stay at the hotel in town. The hotel in town charges $1.50, Mara said. See, the room I'm not using costs nothing. She stood and picked up both cups. See, I'm not forgiving you, she added without cruelty. See, I just don't see any reason to spend money on a hotel when there's a spare room here. See, Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, you're not what I expected either. See, nobody ever is, Mara said, and went to put more water on. See, she told Gideon that evening. All of it Nora's account, the documents, the $40, the specifications Pruitt had given the agency on Silas's behalf. See, she told him the way she told him everything, directly, at the kitchen table, with the papers laid out in front of them both. See, he read the documents in the same focused silence he brought to everything he read. See, she watched him go through the agency director's letter twice. See, she watched the muscle in his jaw work once, tight and deliberate, and then settle. See, when he set the papers down, his hands were very still. See, he paid $40, Gideon said yes. He looked at the table for a moment. See, I've been fighting this man for 2 years. He's bought up debt, pressured buyers, cut off supply lines. He stopped. See, and the start of all of it, the thing he thought would finally break the back of it, cost him $40. See, because he thought I was the kind of woman $40 could purchase and destroy, Mara said. See, the words sat between them. Gideon looked up at her. See, something moved through his expression that she couldn't name precisely. It wasn't pity. She would have bristled at pity, and it wasn't indignation exactly, though it had some of that. See, it was more like the kind of anger that has nowhere useful to go and so goes inward, where it becomes something quieter and more dangerous. See, he was wrong, Gideon said. Yes, she said. And now we have paper that says so. See, he looked at the documents again. The question is how to use them. See, not yet, she said, not before the drive. He frowned slightly. See, if we present these to the bank, if we present them before the drive, Silas knows we have them and he adjusts. See, she had thought about this all afternoon, turning it around the way she turned everything around, looking for the load-bearing point, looking for the order of operations that didn't give the other side time to respond. See, right now the only advantage we have is that he doesn't know what Nora told us. See, the moment we use these documents publicly, that advantage is gone. See, we have one chance to use it at maximum impact. Gideon was quiet. See, the auction, he said. The auction, she confirmed. See, in front of buyers, in front of the whole market. See, where it does the most damage to the thing he values most, which is his control over Red Hollow's trade. See, he thought about this. She let him think. It's a gamble, he said finally. See, everything we've done in the past 6 weeks has been a gamble. See, this one's bigger. Yes, she agreed. It is. He picked up the documents and squared them against the table edge, the way she'd noticed he squared things when he was making a decision that he'd live with regardless of outcome. See, then we drive the herd first, he said. We get Purcell's contract first. See, and then we go to the auction. And then we go to the auction, she said. See, he set the documents down. Tell Nora she should still be here when it happens. See, Mara nodded. I already asked her to stay. He looked at her with the expression she'd come to associate with those moments when she did something that recalibrated him. See, of course you did, he said. The trouble came 4 nights before the drive. See, she woke to it not a sound exactly, but the absence of the usual sounds, the particular quality of wrong quiet that livestock operations developed when something was off in the herd. See, she'd learned to hear it from her father, who had called it rancher's sleep, the part of your brain that never quite switched off, that kept one ear turned toward the pasture even when the rest of you was under. See, she was out of bed with her coat on before she was fully awake. See, the yard was dark and cold, the kind of cold that had real intention behind it. See, she grabbed the lantern from the kitchen hook and went out the back, and she could hear it then, the uneasy movement of cattle, the low-level disturbance that meant the herd was not settled, was reacting to something. See, she went to the north pasture fence and held up the lantern and counted what she could see. See, the numbers were wrong. She stood very still, counting again. See, then she ran. She hammered on Gideon's door with the flat of her hand. See, he opened it already half awake, and she said, the north fence. See, something's wrong with the north fence. The herd is moving. See, he was dressed and out the door in under 2 minutes. See, she heard him wake Cal and Dolph, and then Hector appeared from the small bunkhouse without being called, the way Hector always seemed to know when something needed attending before he was told. See, they rode out in the dark with 3 lanterns between them. See, it took 11 minutes to reach the north fence, and what they found was not the result of an animal or a weather event. See, 3 sections of the fence had been cut, not broken cut, deliberately, with wire cutters, in a way that opened a gap wide enough to let the whole herd through if they'd pushed. See, they had pushed, or been pushed. She couldn't tell which from the state of the ground in the dark. See, how many got through? Gideon's voice was controlled in the specific way of someone using control as a tool. See, I counted maybe 40 missing when I was at the fence, Mara said. See, could be more. It was dark. The ravine country on the north side. Hector said it quietly. See, he didn't need to say more. The ravine country was rough, heavily broken terrain, the kind of place where a spooked herd in the dark could scatter in ways that would take days to undo. See, some of them wouldn't be found. Dolph was looking at the cut wire. See, this wasn't an accident, he said. No, Gideon said. See, it wasn't. Nobody said Silas Crowder's name. They didn't need to. See, split up or stay together, Cal asked. Split up, we cover more ground, Gideon said. See, split up, we also have less chance of turning them if we find a group. He looked at Mara. See, she had already been thinking about it. The ravine country's geography, she'd walked part of it in her second week at the ranch, mentally mapping it, because that was what she did with land, cataloged it, noted its tendencies. See, there were 3 natural gathering points where the terrain would slow a panicked herd. See, 3 places where the land itself would do part of the work if you could get animals moving in the right direction. See, stay together until we reach the first draw, she said. See, then Hector goes right. Cal takes the center, we take left. See, if you find them, don't push slow and patient. Let them choose the direction. See, the terrain will guide them back if we don't panic them further. See, Gideon was already moving toward his horse. You heard her. See, Dolph mounted without comment. That in itself told her something about how the balance had shifted over 6 weeks. See, they rode for 2 hours in the dark and the cold, and Mara learned things about herself that she hadn't known before specifically, that she could navigate broken terrain at night by lantern with more competence than she'd expected. See, and that fear properly managed was actually quite useful. See, it sharpened things. It made the sounds of the night more distinct, the ground more real under the horse's feet, the distant movement of cattle more readable. See, she and Gideon found the first group in the second draw, 16 animals clustered against a rocky outcrop, unsettled but not panicked, which was the best possible situation. See, they worked them slowly, no sudden moves, no raised voices. See, she went to the right, and Gideon went left, and they began the patient work of encouraging 16 confused cattle to make choices that seemed like their own idea. See, it took 40 minutes. The animals kept testing the perimeter, pushing toward the ravine edge, and she kept redirecting them with small movements, a shift in position, a low, steady sound. See, a patience that she had to consciously maintain against the knowledge that every hour in the dark was 1 hour closer to losing an animal over a ledge she couldn't see. See, they lost one that way. She heard it before she understood what she was hearing, a scrabble of hooves, a different quality of sound, and then absence. See, it hit her harder than she expected. Not because it was a catastrophe, one animal was not a catastrophe in the larger context, but because she'd been managing these animals for 6 weeks, had watched them improve. See, had stood in the separation pen and felt the specific satisfaction of seeing something that was supposed to die decide not to, and the sudden arbitrary finality of it in the dark felt like an argument against everything she'd been doing. See, she filed it away. She kept working. Gideon said nothing about it. See, he'd heard too. By the time they linked up with Cal and Hector at the second draw, they had found 37 of the missing animals. See, 3 were still unaccounted for. They searched for another hour before Hector said, quietly, that in this terrain at this hour, further searching was more likely to injure the horses than find the cattle. See, morning, he said. Better light, we'll find them. See, Gideon looked at the recovered animals, at the sky beginning to gray at its lowest edge, at the fence gap they still needed to repair. See, all right, he said. We bring these home. They found all 3 missing animals in the first 2 hours after sunrise. See, one had gone further north than expected and was found by Cal near a creek bend, alone and irritable. See, the other 2 had somehow circled south and were back in the main pasture, which nobody could entirely explain, but which Hector received with the equanimity of a man who had stopped being surprised by the inexplicable behavior of cattle. See, the reddish bull calf was fine. She checked it specifically, standing in the separation pen with her hand against its neck, counting. See, strong and steady. She let out a breath she hadn't been entirely aware of holding. See, Gideon came to stand behind her. All of the separation pen group accounted for? See, all 7. She stepped back from the calf, the fence. See, Cal and Dolph are already on it. He paused. We'll need to post a watch at night until the drive. See, yes. She turned to look at him. He looked like 4 hours of rough country in the dark, looked on a person which was to say terrible, in the particular way of someone operating on reserves they hadn't known they had. See, she imagined she looked approximately the same. Are you going to report the cut fence? See, to who? His voice was flat. The county sheriff is friends with Silas Crowder. See, I know. I'm asking if you're going to report it anyway. See, he considered this. As a matter of record, he said finally. See, yes. Even if nothing comes of it, I want it documented that we reported it. See, she nodded. I'll write it up. I write more legibly than you do. See, he looked at her. How do you know how I write? I've seen the ledger. See, he almost smiled, and it was such a near thing, under such circumstances, that it surprised her. See, fair, he said. Nora was in the kitchen when they got back, having apparently decided that the appropriate response to being woken by 4 people riding out in the dark was to build the fire and have food ready when they returned. See, there was coffee, and there were eggs, and there was biscuit dough in a pan that Mara was fairly certain Nora had figured out from looking at what was on the shelves, because she'd never struck her as a particularly experienced cook. See, Dolph ate 3 helpings without saying anything. Cal ate with the focused gratitude of someone who'd been running on adrenaline and cold air for 4 hours. See, Hector ate slowly and said between bites, "Good biscuits," which from Hector was an effusive review. See, Nora refilled cups without being asked and kept her own counsel, and Mara watched her and thought that Nora Bell, whatever else she was or had failed to be, was making a real effort at something. See, she didn't know yet whether the effort would matter. See, but she noted it. After breakfast, when the hands had gone back out and Gideon had gone to speak with Cal about the night watch schedule, Mara sat at the table with the remaining coffee and looked at the documents she'd put back on the kitchen shelf. See, the agency papers. Nora's signed account. They cut the fence, Nora said. See, she was washing the cups at the basin last night. See, yes, Nora didn't turn around. He's escalating. See, he's worried, Mara said. Men like Silas escalate when they're worried. See, they become more obvious. She picked up her cup, which is useful. See, how is it useful? Because obvious men make obvious mistakes. She thought about the cut fence sections, the 3 precise cuts, the deliberate geometry of it. See, he was careful about the debt. He was careful about the agency. See, he was careful about pressuring Hendricks. Last night was not careful. See, Nora turned then. He's running out of time. We both are, Mara said. See, the question is who makes the critical mistake first. See, the 9 days between the fence cutting and the November drive were the most tightly wound of her life. See, she did not relax. She did not allow herself the small luxury of believing that things were going to work, because belief of that kind loosened your attention, and loose attention was exactly what their situation could not afford. See, she checked the fence line every morning. She went through the weight records every evening. See, she slept 4 or 5 hours and made up the difference with the particular wakefulness of someone operating on deadline. See, Purcell's agent came on the 7th day. Not Purcell himself, a younger man named Whitfield, precise and professional. See, carrying a leather case and a set of questions that Mara recognized as the specific questions of a buyer who had been told to look for reasons to say no rather than reasons to say yes. See, she understood this. It was how cautious men operated. See, the questions were a filter, not an obstacle. She answered every question with documentation. See, weight records, feeding protocols written in her own hand, precise and consistent over 6 weeks. See, pasture condition reports she'd been writing weekly since the 2nd week. See, the calves' progression from critical condition through recovery, tracked in numbers. See, when Whitfield asked about the 2 animals that hadn't made it, she told him plainly what had happened and why, and she told him what she'd adjusted in the protocol after each loss and what the result of those adjustments had been. See, Whitfield looked up from the documentation at one point and said, with the faint surprise of a man who came in expecting less, "How long have you been keeping records of this quality?" See, 6 weeks on this operation, she said, 15 years overall. See, he looked at her over the papers for a moment. Then he made a note. See, Mr. Purcell will want to see the herd himself before the drive. See, of course, she said. When? 3 days. We'll have them ready. See, Whitfield left with the documentation she'd made copies, which he noted with another small adjustment to his expression. See, Gideon watched him ride out from the yard and then looked at her. See, well, he's going to recommend Purcell make the visit, she said. See, the documentation did its work. You think Purcell will offer the contract? See, she thought about it honestly. I think Purcell will offer a contract if the herd looks like the records say it does. See, and it does. Gideon let out a slow breath. 3 more days. See, 3 more days, she confirmed, then the drive. See, then the auction. He turned toward the barn. I should check the loading equipment. See, Gideon. He stopped. She had not been certain she was going to say this until she said it, which was unlike her. See, whatever happens at the auction, whatever happens with the notes, the bank, all of it, I want you to know that I don't regret staying. See, he turned around. He looked at her in the way that she'd come to know was his way of receiving something significant with complete stillness, as if he were trying not to disturb it. See, neither do I, he said. It was a short thing. 4 words. See, she filed it in the same place she'd filed the blanket on her bed, and the night in the ravine country, and the way he'd told the platform men to stop laughing, with nothing more than a slow look. See, the place where she kept the things she wasn't ready to examine directly, but wasn't willing to throw away. See, she nodded and went back to the separation pen. See, Purcell came on the 3rd day, as Whitfield had said. See, he came alone, which surprised her buyers of his standing, usually brought someone with them, an assistant or an associate, another set of eyes. See, he walked the herd for 40 minutes without speaking, which she recognized as the behavior of a man who trusted his own assessment and didn't need to perform it. See, he stopped in front of the reddish bull calf, who had grown enough in 6 weeks to no longer look like a runt, though he was still on the compact side, see, and had developed a particular alertness that set him apart from the other animals, a way of watching you that was more direct than cattle usually managed. See, this one was in the critical group you wrote about, Purcell said. See, not a question. The worst of the 7, she said. See, he was the one I was least certain about. Purcell studied the calf for another moment. See, what made you decide to try on him? See, she thought about the night she'd first put her hand against its neck, the slow, uncertain beat under her palm, the way the calf had turned its head toward her without fear, because it didn't have the energy for fear. See, he didn't give up, she said. Animals that have decided to die stop engaging with what's around them. See, he was still looking. Purcell was quiet for a moment. See, then he said, Whitfield said your records were the best he'd seen from an independent operation in 4 years. See, they're thorough, she said. They're more than thorough. He turned from the calf and looked at her directly. See, I'd like to talk about a forward agreement. She kept her face neutral. See, I'm listening. If this herd presents at auction the way these records suggest it should, I'm prepared to offer a 2-season forward contract. See, guaranteed floor price, first right on surplus above that floor, documentation requirements that match what you've been keeping anyway. He paused. See, it's not a favor. It's a business decision. I've been looking for a regional partner with consistent quality for 2 seasons. See, Iron Mesa's numbers justify it if the herd lives up to them. See, the herd will live up to them, she said. I believe you, Purcell said. See, that's why I'm here without my assistant. She found Gideon at the loading barn and told him. See, he stood very still for a moment, and she watched the tension in his shoulders do something it hadn't done in the 6 weeks she'd been here. It let go. Just partially, just for a second. See, like a rope under too much load that's suddenly been given a half-inch of slack. See, 2 seasons, he said. 2 seasons guaranteed floor. See, with documentation. He looked at the barn wall for a moment. See, then he looked at her. You did that, we did it, she said. See, I kept records. You kept the ranch running long enough for the records to matter. See, he started to say something. Then he stopped. He looked like he was choosing between several things he might say, and discarding most of them as insufficient. See, thank you, he said finally. It was inadequate, and they both knew it, but she understood that some things resisted being said adequately, and the attempt was what mattered. See, don't thank me yet, she said. We still have the auction. See, the night before the drive, she took the red freight tag out of her coat pocket. See, she hadn't looked at it since the first morning on the platform, when she'd folded it and put it away. See, she'd kept it through 6 weeks of early mornings and cold nights and sick calves and cut fences and ledger calculations, carried it without entirely knowing why not as a punishment. See, not as a reminder of humiliation, but as something she wasn't finished with yet. See, something that hadn't resolved. She sat at the kitchen table with the lamp and looked at the words. See, useless goods. She turned it over in her hands. The paper had softened from being carried in a pocket, lost its crispness, absorbed the warmth of 6 weeks of Montana mornings. See, it felt like what it was, a piece of paper, a thing someone had written on. See, a sentence someone had made about her before they'd known anything about her, based on the calculation that her circumstances made her worth nothing. See, she thought about Silas Crowder's face tomorrow. She thought about the auction, the buyers. the 2 documents in her coat. See, she thought about Nora, who was staying through the auction because she'd said she would. See, she thought about the forward contract with Purcell, signed that afternoon in Gideon's kitchen with 2 witnesses and a handshake that felt like something real. See, she folded the tag again and put it back in her pocket. See, she blew out the lamp. Tomorrow, she thought, they would find out what it was all worth. See, she was ready. The drive to Red Hollow took 7 hours. See, not because the distance was exceptional, but because moving a herd of cattle across rough country in early November required a patience that couldn't be hurried without cost. See, and the cost of hurrying cattle on the day before an auction was weight loss and distress, two things that showed in the pen and registered in a buyer's assessment before he'd even touched the first animal. See, Mara had said this the night before when Gideon had talked about an early start, and she'd said it plainly: a calm herd shows better than a fast herd. See, Gideon had agreed, so they started at first light, moved steady, and let the animals find their rhythm. See, she rode drag with Dolph, which put them at the back of the herd eating dust and dealing with the strays and the stubborn ones, the work that got the least credit and required the most consistency. See, she hadn't assigned herself there. She'd simply ended up there on the first morning of the practice drive the week before, and nobody had suggested she move, and she hadn't suggested it either. See, you learned things from the back of a herd. You saw which animals were lagging, which ones had a tendency to peel off left, which ones responded to sound versus movement. See, she'd been watching for a week and knew this herd's particular patterns well enough to anticipate most of them before they became problems. See, Dolph rode beside her for 2 hours before he said anything. See, this was normal. She'd stopped expecting Dolph to fill silence the way other people did. See, "Runt's holding up," he said finally, nodding toward the compact reddish steer, the bull calf, now properly a steer who was moving with the herd at a steady, unhurried pace. See, Dolph had taken to calling him Runt, which had stuck around the ranch despite the fact that Runt was no longer actually the smallest animal in the group. See, he's always been a better traveler than the others, Mara said. See, more alert. Dolph was quiet for another stretch. See, then what happens if Silas's men turn the buyers away before we get the animals to the pen? See, she'd thought about this. They won't do it at the gate. See, too visible. He'll work the buyers privately before and after, but the gate is public and Silas doesn't make public mistakes. See, he had the fence cut. That was private country in the dark. She watched a young heifer drift right and adjusted her position without urgency, letting the animal find its way back to the group on its own rather than pushing it. See, the auction market is different. There are too many people he still needs to do business with. See, he won't do anything that the whole room can see him do. See, Dolph considered this, and you think the documents Nora brought will be enough. See, she glanced at him. She hadn't known Dolph knew about the documents. Gideon hadn't mentioned sharing that, and she hadn't. See, who told you about those? Cal. Dolph kept his eyes forward. See, Cal talks. She made a note to have a word with Cal about what information stayed inside the operation. See, the documents establish what Silas did, she said. See, whether that's enough depends on what the buyers decide to do with knowing it. See, you're betting everything on people doing the right thing when they find out, Dolph said. See, there was no contempt in it, just the flat assessment of a man who had seen people make the wrong choice with full information too many times to be surprised by it. See, I'm betting on people doing the profitable thing, she said. See, which is usually close enough. Dolph was quiet for a long moment. See, you're smarter than I gave you credit for, he said. See, when you first got here, she looked at him. See, he was staring at the herd with the same impassive expression he brought to everything, and she understood that this was, from Dolph, an extraordinary statement, one that had probably cost him something to say. See, you kept the calves alive, she said, after I set up the protocol. See, you did that work every day without being asked to do it twice. See, Dolph said nothing. See, but after a moment he moved his horse slightly to the right to block a steer that was thinking about drifting, and they rode the rest of the drive without speaking, which was as comfortable a silence as she'd experienced since arriving in Montana. See, Red Hollow received the herd the way small cattle towns receive all drives with the organized chaos of a system that barely worked and somehow always did. See, the pens on the east side of the market building, filled with the noise and smell of livestock that had been walking since before sunrise, and Mara dismounted at the gate and walked the pen line herself. See, checking each animal with the brisk efficiency of someone who needed to know the damage from the road before the buyers started their assessments. See, the damage was minimal. A few animals with minor leg stiffness that would work out inside an hour. See, one cow that had developed a small cut from a fence wire on the last stretch she cleaned it herself with the kit she'd carried in her saddlebag, and it was surface level, nothing that would affect the assessment. See, the herd had traveled well. The records had predicted they would, and they had. See, she was at the far end of the pen when she saw Silas. See, he was standing near the market building's side entrance, with two men she didn't recognize well-dressed, the kind of well-dressed that suggested they were buyers. See, or represented buyers, and he was speaking to them with the easy authority of a man conducting a familiar transaction. See, he saw her at the same moment she saw him, and the cold smile appeared on schedule. See, she held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she went back to checking the last 3 animals in the pen, because the animals were what mattered this morning, and Silas Crowder was not going to make her forget that. See, Gideon appeared at the pen gate. "Purcell's here," he said quietly. See, he's talking to the market manager about the documentation requirements for the forward contract. See, it needs to be registered with the market before the auction opens. See, an hour, maybe less. He paused. See, Silas got to Hargrove this morning. See, Hargrove was the market's head auctioneer, the man who controlled the bidding tokens, who decided which lots were called in what order, who had the practical authority to include or exclude sellers from the day's proceedings on procedural grounds. See, what did he say to him? I don't know. But Hargrove told me when I arrived that there was a question about Iron Mesa's eligibility to bid this season due to the outstanding notes. See, he said he'd need to review it before issuing our token. See, she straightened from the pen rail. That's not a market rule. See, no, Gideon said. It isn't, she thought quickly. See, where is Hargrove now? His office. I came to find you first. See, don't go back to Hargrove yet, she said. Give me 20 minutes. She was already moving toward the market building. See, and find Nora. She found Purcell inside the market building near the registration desk, speaking with a young clerk about the forward contract paperwork. See, Purcell was the kind of man who occupied space calmly, who moved through rooms without announcing himself, and who she had come to recognize as genuinely useful specifically because he had no stake in the social architecture of Red Hollow. See, he did business here, but he was not of here, which meant Silas's influence over him was transactional at best and had limits. See, Mr. Purcell, she said, I need a moment. He excused himself from the clerk and came to stand with her near the window. See, outside she could see the pens, the herd, Cal walking the fence line with the focused attention she'd come to rely on. See, Hargrove is creating a procedural obstacle, she said. See, he's claiming Iron Mesa's outstanding notes make us ineligible for a bidding token. See, that's not a rule in the market charter. Purcell looked at her steadily. See, have you read the market charter? I read it 2 days ago. She'd found a copy in Red Hollow's land office during the supply run she'd made under the pretense of checking on Alvarez's order. See, outstanding debt is not listed as grounds for exclusion. See, Hargrove has discretionary authority over procedural matters, but it's meant for genuine procedural violations, not financial status. See, Purcell was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? See, the forward contract registration, she said. If the contract is registered with the market before the auction opens, Iron Mesa is formally recognized as a business with contracted income, not a business in default. See, it changes the procedural argument significantly. See, it changes it entirely, Purcell said without inflection. See, a seller under forward contract is a preferred seller. See, Hargrove can't exclude a preferred seller on financial grounds. It would violate the contract's market recognition clause. See, yes, she said. He looked at her for another moment. See, then he turned toward the registration desk. I'll have the clerk prioritize the registration, he said. See, give me 15 minutes. She went to find Nora. See, Nora was outside near the market building's east wall, which put her away from the main crowd, and the pen entrance she'd found the position herself, Mara noted, see, which suggested she understood both the need to be accessible and the need not to be visible too early. See, she had the signed account in her bag and the original agency documents in a separate envelope, and she looked like a woman who had made a decision she intended to follow through on regardless of how it felt. See, Silas is here, Mara said. He got to Hargrove. We're handling it. See, I saw him, Nora said. He brought Pruitt. Mara's attention sharpened. See, Pruitt is here. Pruitt, the man who had arranged the agency transaction on Silas's behalf, was, by the presence of the documents in Nora's bag, the most legally exposed person in this situation besides Silas himself. See, where? He went into the building about 10 minutes ago. See, he came out once and looked at the pens, then went back in. See, he's managing buyers, Mara said, working them before the floor opens. She thought about the order of operations. See, the contract registration was 15 minutes away. See, after that, the procedural obstacle with Hargrove became moot. See, then the auction opened. When the floor opens, you'll know when to come forward. See, after Silas makes his move, Nora said. When there's the most people watching. See, yes. She looked at Nora directly. Are you certain? See, Nora's jaw was set in the way of someone past uncertainty and into something harder. See, I've been certain since the night I booked the stage ticket, she said. See, I'm just glad I got here before it was too late to matter. See, Mara nodded. She put her hand briefly on Nora's arm, not a warm gesture, not a cold one, just an acknowledgement. See, then she went back inside. The forward contract was registered at 12 minutes past 9, which was 11 minutes before the auction floor opened. See, Mara was at the registration desk when the clerk stamped it, and she took the market's copy of the registration receipt to Hargrove's office herself, knocked, and set it on his desk when he opened the door. See, Hargrove was a thin man with an impressive mustache that he seemed to use as a substitute for a more complex personality. See, he looked at the registration receipt. He looked at Mara. See, this doesn't resolve the question of the outstanding. See, Iron Mesa Ranch is a registered preferred seller as of 9/12 this morning, she said. See, the market charter, Section 4, Clause 2, preferred sellers are entitled to full bidding access regardless of procedural review. She paused. See, I've read the charter, Mr. Hargrove. Have you? His mustache shifted. See, I am familiar with the charter. Then you know Iron Mesa's token is not discretionary. She kept her voice level. See, I'll collect it at the token desk, please. He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man trying to find an exit from a situation he'd walked into on someone else's instructions. See, she didn't help him find one. See, she just waited, with her hands at her sides, and her face arranged in the patient, specific calm of a woman who had been up since 4 in the morning and had no intention of leaving this office without what she'd come for. See, he wrote the authorization. She took it to the token desk, collected Iron Mesa's brass bidding token, and put it in her coat pocket next to the red freight tag. See, the auction floor opened at 9:30. See, the market building's main room filled with the particular density of a cattle auction buyers in their working clothes, ranchers from the surrounding territory, market hands. See, a few men who were there for reasons that had more to do with information than commerce. See, the smell of the room was sawdust and wool and coffee from the urn at the back wall that someone had set up sometime before most people arrived. See, Silas moved through the room with his 2 well-dressed companions, speaking to buyers in the quiet, brief way of a man confirming arrangements rather than making them. See, she watched him work from across the room and noted which buyers he spoke to and which ones he didn't approach, because the ones he didn't approach were potentially useful. See, he saw her with the token. She watched him see it. See, It was a small thing, a slight stiffening, a recalibration behind the eyes, and it was over in a second, replaced immediately by the composed surface he maintained in public. See? But she'd been watching Silas Crowder for 6 weeks through the lenses of everything Nora had told her and everything she'd worked out herself, and she could read the tells now the way she read sick cattle. See? Not from any one sign, but from the combination of small things that individually meant nothing and together meant everything. See? He hadn't expected the token. He'd expected Hargrove to hold. See? Which meant he had not anticipated the forward contract, which meant his intelligence about Iron Mesa's dealings in the last week was incomplete. See? Which meant there was a gap in his preparation. She found Gideon near the pen entrance. See? He didn't know about the contract, she said quietly. See? Gideon absorbed this. That's something. It's significant. See? His buyers are positioned to block us on the assumption that we'd be excluded from the floor or too financially compromised to be worth bidding on. She looked out at the pen where Iron Mesa's herd was visible through the gate. See, he's going to have to adjust in real time. People who adjust in real time make different mistakes than people who execute prepared plans. See, more aggressive mistakes, Gideon said, usually. She looked at him. See, stay close to the floor during the first lots. I'm going to the pen. See, why the pen? Because that's where the buyers look before they decide. She moved toward the gate. See, I want to be there when they look. See, the first 3 auction lots were not Iron Mesas. See, they were neighboring ranches' decent herds, competent presentations, the routine business of a regional cattle market. See, she stood outside Iron Mesa's pen during these lots, and she watched the buyers cycle through the viewing area between bids, and she engaged each one who slowed near the gate. See, not with a pitch. She'd thought carefully about this. See, a pitch was a salesman's move, and these men had been sold to by Silas Crowder all morning. See, what she did instead was answer questions that hadn't been asked, yet she would look at the cattle herself, make a specific observation in the tone of a person thinking aloud, and wait to see if it created a question. See, it usually did. With the first buyer who stopped a heavyset man named Greer from up near Billings, who she'd been told was independent of Silas's arrangement, she said, apparently to herself. See, the weight variance between this group and the standard regional grade is documented in the lot records, if you want to verify. Greer, who had been looking at the herd with professional blankness, turned and said, "What lot records?" See, and she walked him through the documentation that Whitfield had reviewed and Purcell had verified, showing the 6-week progression with the specificity of someone who had lived inside these numbers. See, Greer spent 12 minutes with the documentation. See, he asked 4 questions. She answered 3 of them directly and referred the 4th to Gideon, who she'd signaled over, because the 4th question was about the North Pasture's infrastructure, and Gideon knew it better than she did. See, after Greer moved on, she did the same with 2 more buyers in the following 20 minutes. See, neither of them were going to be as important as she hoped. One was too heavily in Silas's trading relationship to move easily. See, and she could see that in the way he engaged with the documentation without quite committing to looking at the actual animals. But the third one, see, a woman named Clark who represented a Denver-based purchasing consortium and who had arrived that morning without apparent pre-arrangement with Silas, spent 25 minutes at the pen and left with a copy of the feeding protocol. See, it was during Clark's review that Silas appeared at the pen gate. See, he came alone this time, which she registered as a tactical change. The well-dressed companions were elsewhere on the floor. See, he stood at the gate with his arms folded and waited until Clark had moved away. See, then he looked at Mara with the smile she'd been looking at since the train platform, and she looked back at it with the same patience she applied to everything about him. See, impressive work, he said, nodding at the herd. Genuinely. See, for a first season. Thank you, she said without affect. See, though I suppose it depends on whether the buyers agree. He glanced toward the floor, toward the buyers she'd just spoken with. See, Greer tends to be conservative in new relationships. See, Clark's consortium is notoriously slow to commit. He returned his gaze to her. See, all that effort, and the critical question is whether the room decides it matters. See, that is in general, see, the nature of markets, she said. See, he tilted his head. He was recalibrating again. She could see it more clearly now, the slight adjustment behind the eyes, when she didn't respond the way he'd arranged for her to respond. See, she was supposed to be frightened or desperate or at least visibly uncertain. See, she was none of those things, and it was throwing his footing. See, you've done well for yourself, he said, shifting to something that sounded more like conversation. See, genuinely, a woman in your position, arriving the way you did, most people would have taken the ticket home. See, I know, she said. That's what you were counting on. See, the smile remained. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. She kept her voice the same level, conversational, as if they were discussing weather. See, $40, Mr. Crowder. That's what you paid. See, not for a bride, for an instrument. Something very slight happened in his expression. See, just for a moment, just long enough. I'd be careful about making accusations you can't support, he said. See, I'm not making an accusation, she said. I'm stating a fact. See, there's a difference. She looked at the herd. I should get back to the documentation. See, the lot opens in 20 minutes. He stayed at the gate for another moment. See, then he left. She watched him go and noted the direction not toward the floor, but toward Hargrove's office, and she turned and went inside to find Gideon. See, it's starting, she said. He's going to try something before the lot opens. See, Hargrove again? Probably procedural. Or he'll get word to the buyers to hold their tokens, she thought quickly. See, where's Nora? Near the east wall. It's time. See, she went to Nora. Nora looked at her face and straightened without being told. See now? Close to it. I want you visible before the lot opens, not after. See, if you come forward after Silas makes a move, it looks reactive. See, if you're already in the room when the lot opens, with the documents, it looks like testimony rather than retaliation. See, Nora nodded. Her color was high and her breathing was slightly faster than usual, but her hands were steady. See, where do I stand? Near the registration desk. In view of the main floor, she held Nora's gaze. See, you say only what you know, nothing beyond that. See, I know enough, Nora said. I know you do. They went in together. See, Iron Mesa's lot was called forth in the morning session. See, the auctioneer, not Hargrove, who had apparently decided to be unavailable, but his deputy. See, a straightforward man named Kessler, who ran lots without editorial, opened the bidding with the standard preamble and invited the buyer pool to register interest. See, no tokens appeared on Iron Mesa's rail. The silence lasted about 10 seconds. See, in a cattle auction, 10 seconds without a token is not unusual. Buyers wait. They watch each other. They hold their position until someone moves first. See, but 10 seconds became 15, and 15 became 20, and Mara, standing at the edge of the floor with the bidding documentation in her hands and the brass token in her pocket, see, understood what 20 seconds of silence in a room full of prepared buyers meant. See, Silas had gotten to them. Not all of them. Clark was still present, still neutral, but enough of the primary buyers that no one wanted to be the first to move against the implicit arrangement. See, this was how Silas operated, not force, not threat, just the careful management of who could afford to cross him and who couldn't. See, most of these buyers did regular business in Red Hollow. See, regular business meant regular exposure to Silas's influence. See, the calculation was simple, and most of them had made it before they'd put on their coats that morning. See, Kessler called for interest again. The rail stayed empty. See, Mara walked onto the floor. She didn't raise her voice. See, she didn't address the auctioneer. She walked to the center of the floor where the pen gate was visible through the main window, and she turned to face the room and she said, "Look at the cattle." See, a few people looked at her. A few looked at the cattle. See, most looked at neither, the way people in rooms look at nothing in particular when they're waiting for someone else to decide what to do. See, I'm not asking you to bid, she said. I'm asking you to look. See, you're buyers. Looking at cattle is your trade. She held up the documentation. See, 6 weeks of record. See, weight progression. See, feeding protocols. See, pasture management. See, documented health outcomes. See, I have a forward contract registered with this market as of this morning, verified by Garrett Purcell of the Billings Purcell Consortium. She paused. See, look at the cattle, then decide. Silas spoke from the side of the room. See, he had appeared sometime in the last 2 minutes, and his voice carried the particular controlled pleasantness of a man who is very angry and has excellent manners. See, Miss Whitlock has been a dedicated advocate for Iron Mesa Ranch, which I think speaks well of her. See, but advocacy isn't documentation, and the outstanding financial obligations of this operation represent. See, the outstanding financial obligations of this operation, Nora said from near the registration desk, were manufactured. See, the room went quiet in a different way, not the waiting quiet of before. See, the listening quiet of people who have just heard something they didn't expect and don't yet know how to categorize. See, Nora walked forward. She held the envelope in both hands steadily. See, my name is Nora Bell. I worked for the Consolidated Western Marriage Agency in St. Louis for 3 years. 11 months ago, a man named Pruitt representing Silas Crowder paid the agency $40 to select and send a specific kind of woman to Red Hollow. She paused. See, the specifications were that she should have no family connections, no financial resources, and no ability to seek outside help. See, the intent was to attach a woman to Iron Mesa Ranch who would add financial strain, invite public ridicule, and accelerate the ranch's path to foreclosure. She lifted the envelope. See, I have the written agreement. I have the director's correspondence confirming the arrangement was carried out as specified. See, and I have my own signed account of what I was told and what I witnessed. See, Pruitt, somewhere behind Silas, said something in a low voice. See, Silas didn't respond to him. He was looking at Nora with an expression that had lost the smile. See, Clark, the Denver Consortium representative, said clearly and without raising her voice, "May I see the documentation?" See, Nora crossed the floor and handed her the envelope. See, Silas said, "This is a fabrication by a disgruntled former employee." See, "Which part is fabricated?" Mara said. She was still standing in the center of the floor. See, the written agreement, the director's letter, or the fact that I'm standing here instead of on an eastbound train, which is where you needed me to be. She looked at the room. See, not at Silas, at the buyers, at the ranchers, at the people who did their regular business in this town, under the regular management of a man who had just been publicly shown to have paid $40 to destroy a ranch through deception. See, he needed this ranch to fail, she said. He arranged for it. See, he bought its debt. He had its fence cut in the night 4 days before this drive. She paused. See, and the cattle in that pen, the cattle you won't look at because he's told you not to, those animals are healthy. See, they are documented, verified, and contracted. Whatever you decide today, you're deciding with that information. See, the room held still. Then Clark took a brass token from her coat pocket. See, she walked to Iron Mesa's rail and hung it. Greer, from across the room, looked at the rail. See, looked at the cattle through the window, looked at Silas. See, then he reached into his vest and walked to the rail. See, his token went up beside Clark's. Silas said, "I'll remind the room that I hold the note on this operation, and any..." See, you hold a note that was structured to foreclose on a ranch you arranged to weaken through fraud, Gideon said. See, he'd come onto the floor at some point in the last 2 minutes, and his voice was the same controlled quiet it always was, but it carried the specific weight of a man who had been patient for a long time and was done being patient. See, that note is going to be challenged in county court with documented evidence of the arrangement behind it. See, if you want to push foreclosure, push it. Let a judge look at what Nora just handed to Mrs. See, Clark. A third buyer moved to the rail. Then a fourth, a man who had been in Silas's conversation group that morning, which told Mara something significant about what the documents in Clark's hands were saying to people who read them. See, Kessler, the deputy auctioneer, cleared his throat. See, we have 4 tokens on the Iron Mesa rail, he said, with the careful neutrality of a man who understood that his job was to run the floor and not to have opinions. See, are we opening bids? Silas looked at the rail. He looked at the room. See, he looked at Mara. She looked back at him. She thought about the platform. See, the red tag. The specific cruelty of useless instead of damaged, because someone had sat and thought about which word cut deeper. See, she thought about $40 and a letter in an envelope that a woman named Nora had carried across 2 states on a stagecoach because she'd finally decided the carrying was necessary. See, she didn't smile at him. She didn't need to. Open bids, she said to Kessler. See, what happened in the next 40 minutes was not a dramatic reversal. In the storybook sense, it was messier and louder and more uncertain than that. See, with 2 of the 4 bidders dropping out after the second round and a tense period where the floor price held at a level that made Gideon's jaw tight beside her, and Clark's consortium sitting at a number that was good but not quite enough. See, and the whole room watching with the specific attention of people who understood they were watching something that would be talked about in Red Hollow for years. See, it was Greer who broke it open. Not from altruism, she'd been right about that. Greer was not an altruistic man, but from the calculation of a conservative buyer who had read the forward contract documentation, assessed the quality of the lot, see, and determined that the floor price was undervaluing what was in the pen. See, he came back in at the 3rd call at a number that forced Clark's consortium to respond, and when 2 operations compete for a lot they both want, the price finds its real level with an efficiency that no other mechanism matches. See, the final sale price was enough to cover the banknote completely. See, it was enough to cover the Hendricks demand note now compromised in its legal standing by the documents in Nora's envelope, but payable nonetheless. See, it was enough for winter supplies purchased with cash from Alvarez's hardware, with Silas's supply cut irrelevant. See, and it left a remainder that was not large, but was real, a number that sat in Mara's calculation as the difference between a ranch in survival and a ranch with the beginning of a margin. See, Gideon stood beside her when Kessler called the final price. See, she heard him exhale once, short and controlled. See, she didn't look at him because she was watching Silas, who was standing at the edge of the room with his composure intact because it was always going to be intact in public, and who would recalculate and would try again, see, and who was not finished simply because today had gone wrong. See, but today had gone wrong for him. That was real. That mattered. See, Purcell crossed the floor and shook Gideon's hand. See, then he looked at Mara with the direct, assessing look she'd come to recognize as his particular form of approval. See, you'll have the contract amendment for the 2nd season's terms by end of week, he said. See, thank you, she said. Don't thank me. He picked up his hat. See, your numbers deserve the contract. I just showed up to confirm it. See, he left. Clark left shortly after with a copy of the feeding protocol and a card she handed to Mara with the Denver Consortium's address on it. See, the room began to empty with the purposeful efficiency of a market that has finished its business and has other business waiting. See, Silas left without speaking to anyone. See, she watched him go through the main door with Pruitt close behind, and she noted the particular quality of how he moved, still composed, still controlled, but with the compressed energy of a man adjusting his thinking on the move. See, he wasn't done. She'd never thought he was going to be done after one day. See, but he was behind, and behind for a man who operated entirely through advantage and information was a genuinely unfamiliar position. See, she found Nora near the registration desk, standing alone with her bag and the empty envelope. See, the documents were with Clark now. Nora looked wrung out in the specific way of someone who has done a difficult thing and is now on the other side of the adrenaline that made it possible. See, Uhel said. I said I would. Nora's voice was tired. See, you did more than hold. Mara looked at her directly. See, you changed the room. That was you. Not the documents just said what happened. See, you were the one who stood up and said it out loud. See, Nora looked at her for a moment. See, there was something in her face that was working through several things at once, relief, and something older and less clean than relief, the kind of thing that comes from knowing you did right eventually while knowing it wasn't soon enough. See, does it matter, she asked. that I did it eventually. See, Mara thought about this honestly, because Nora deserved honesty more than she deserved comfort. See, it mattered today, she said. What you do with it after today is between you and yourself. See, Nora nodded slowly. It was the kind of nod that meant a person was still working, not that they'd arrived. See, Mara understood that kind of nod. Gideon came to stand beside her. See, he had the market receipt in his hand, the final sale document, the number that meant Iron Mesa was not going into foreclosure this winter. See, he held it like a man who doesn't quite trust a thing until he's touched it and confirmed it's real. See, the banknote, she said. I'll take this to Forsyth this afternoon. He looked at her. See, will you come? She looked at the receipt. At the floor, where 40 minutes ago there had been no tokens on their rail, and the silence had been so thick she could feel it pressing. See, she thought about the morning on the train, the freight tag, the specific arithmetic of what Silas had paid to arrange her destruction, and what it had cost him in the end. See, yes, she said. I'll come. Dolph appeared in the door from the pen yard. See, runt's in the pen and he's fine, he said. Sold at the second call. He looked between them. See, good price, Gideon agreed. Dolph nodded. See, he turned and went back to the yard. It was the most he'd said in celebration of anything since she'd arrived, and it was exactly enough. See, Forsyth at the bank was a man who had been doing difficult work for a long time and had the face to show for it, not unkind, but careful, the way people get careful when their daily business involves other people's disasters. See, he received them in his office that afternoon, with the market receipt on the desk between them, and read it with the attention of someone who needs to be certain before he can be relieved. See, he looked up when he'd finished. He looked at Gideon. See, then he looked at Mara, then back at the receipt. This covers the note, he said. See, with $11 remaining, Marcia said, which we'd like applied to the account as a credit against future service. See, Forsyth looked at her for a moment with the expression she had come to recognize from men in positions of institutional authority, the particular recalibration of someone who expected to be dealing with one. See, kind of person, and finds they're dealing with another. See, he picked up his pen. I'll prepare the discharge paperwork. See, and the Hendricks note, Gideon said, the one Silas Crowder consolidated. See, Forsyth set the pen down. Something shifted in his face, not surprise exactly, but the careful blankness of a man who has strong feelings about something and has decided this is not the moment to express them. See, what about it? It's being challenged, Mara said. See, we have documentation establishing that the original arrangement behind the note involved fraudulent intent specifically. See, that Silas Crowder arranged for a deceptive business relationship with Iron Mesa specifically to manufacture debt instruments he could then consolidate and use as foreclosure leverage. She set a copy of the agency documents on his desk. See, we filed notice with the county clerk this morning before the auction opened. See, she had done that. See, Gideon hadn't known she was going to do it. She'd slipped out before the floor opened with Nora and a copy of the documents and found the county clerk's office 2 streets over, and she'd filed a formal notice of contested debt with the clerk. See, who had stamped it with the mechanical efficiency of someone processing paperwork without caring what it meant, which was exactly what she'd needed. See, Forsyth picked up the documents. He read them the way he'd read the receipt, carefully, completely, without rushing. See, when he set them down, his face had changed again, in the small ways that meant a man who has been watching something build from a distance is now looking at it up close. See, these are the agency records, he said. Original copies, Mara said. See, we retain duplicates, and the woman who brought them, the former agency employee, see, has provided a signed witness account and has indicated willingness to testify. She paused. See, Mr. Forsyth, you've known Gideon for 4 years. See, you gave him 2 additional weeks on this note because, as you told him, the documentation he brought you was the kind of record-keeping that changed a conversation. She let that sit for a moment. See, we're having a different conversation now. Forsyth looked at Gideon. See, did you know about this? He meant the agency arrangement. See, the $40. All of it. No, Gideon said. I found out 3 weeks ago. See, Forsyth was quiet for a long moment. See, outside his office window, Red Hollow conducted its afternoon business with the indifference of a town that didn't know yet what had happened that morning in the market building. Though it would know by evening, these things always traveled. See, and in small towns they traveled fast and arrived slightly altered, the way things do when they pass through enough mouths. See, the contested notice is filed, Forsyth said finally, more to himself than to them. See, which means the Crowder note can't be enforced until the contest is resolved. See, correct, Mara said. Which buys you time. It buys us the winter, she said. See, which is what we need. Forsyth picked up his pen again. See, he looked at the market receipt. He looked at the agency documents. See, he looked at two people who had come into his office with the kind of careful, complete preparation that he associated professionally with people who had done something real rather than just survived something by luck. See, he began writing the discharge paperwork. I'll need to speak to the county attorney about the contested note, he said. See, that's not a conversation I'm anticipating with great pleasure. See, no, Gideon agreed. I don't expect it will be. Forsyth signed the discharge. See, he slid it across the desk. Gideon picked it up. He held it the same way he'd held the market receipt, like a man who needs the physical reality of paper to confirm that something has happened. See, Mr. Rusk, Forsyth said as they stood to leave. See, he paused, seeming to choose something. For what it's worth, the operation you described this fall, the feeding records, the pasture work, the herd management, that is the kind of operation this bank would like to support going forward. See, when you're ready to discuss a proper operating line of credit, my door is open. See, Gideon looked at him. I'll bring Miss Whitlock, he said. See, Forsyth nodded. I'd expect nothing less, he said, and there was something in it that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. See, the news moved through Red Hollow the way Mara had predicted, fast and altered. See, by evening the story had gone through several iterations. In one version, Mara had stood on the auction floor and read the documents aloud herself, which she hadn't. See, in another, Silas had been physically removed from the market building, which also hadn't happened. See, in the version that reached the Red Hollow Courier's correspondent by the following morning, see, Silas Crowder had attempted to block the auction using false procedural grounds and been overruled by a coalition of buyers and a woman from Iowa who had apparently memorized the market charter. See, that last version was close enough to accurate that she didn't correct it when Cal read it aloud at breakfast and looked at her with the expectant expression of someone hoping for confirmation. See, I read the charter, she said. That's all. She read it 2 days ago, Gideon said, without looking up from his coffee. See, and memorized the relevant sections. Cal looked between them. See, didn't you just say that's all? It is all, she said. See, reading things carefully isn't remarkable. It's just something most people don't bother to do. See, Cal opened his mouth to say something else. See, Dolph across the table said, see, eat your food, Cal. See, and Cal, recognizing the tone, ate his food. See, Hector on the end of the bench, see, said quietly to his coffee cup, see, good biscuits again. See, which meant Nora had made them, and which also meant Hector had decided Nora was acceptable, which was as close to a formal endorsement as Hector gave anything. See, Nora was still at Iron Mesa. She hadn't planned to be. She'd intended to leave the morning after the auction, and then the morning after that, and each time something had made the departure feel premature without anyone quite saying so. See, on the third morning she'd asked Mara plainly whether she was staying because she was wanted or because she'd lost track of her own decision. See, you're staying because the stage schedule is inconvenient and nobody has asked you to leave, Mara had said. See, those are two different things. Nora had thought about this. See, is there a third option? You could ask if you're needed. See, are you going to tell me if I am? Mara had looked at her. See, the kitchen runs better when there are two people managing it, she said. See, and I am not primarily a kitchen person. Make of that what you want. See, Nora had made of it what she wanted, which apparently was to stay at Iron Mesa through November. See, She paid for her room and food by contributing to the kitchen, and by writing she had a precise, clear hand, and Mara had begun giving her correspondence to handle. See, the letters to suppliers and to Purcell's office, and to the county attorney regarding the contested Crowder note, which required a particular combination of formality and specificity that Nora produced without effort. See, it was an arrangement that nobody had designed and nobody had named. See, Mara found she preferred it that way. Named arrangements had expectations attached to them, and expectations had a way of becoming resentments when the circumstances shifted. See, Silas Crowder did not come quietly. See, she had never thought he would. Men who had operated from a position of unchallenged control for a decade did not absorb a single public reversal and retire gracefully. See, they regrouped, recalculated, and came at the problem from a different angle, and Silas was more competent than most, which made him more dangerous in defeat than many people would have been in victory. See, his first move was legal. He filed a counter-challenge to the contested debt notice within 10 days of the auction. See, through an attorney from Helena who arrived in Red Hollow with the particular confidence of someone who had been briefed on the situation but had not yet fully understood what the documentation on the other side actually contained. See, the Helena attorney's name was Krell, and he was good she could see that from the counterfiling, which was precise and argued from a technically valid position. See, the argument was that the agency arrangement, whatever its intent, did not legally invalidate a debt instrument signed and registered in good faith by Hendrick Supply, regardless of the circumstances under which the debt had been structured. See, it was a real argument. She sat with it for 2 evenings, turning it over, looking for the load-bearing point. See, she found it on the second evening. The load-bearing point was Hendricks himself. See, she rode into Red Hollow the following morning alone. See, she found the supply store in the early hours before the business day properly opened when Hendrick, a tired man in his 60s who had run his store for 30 years, and who looked, she thought, see, like a person who had been sleeping badly for some time, was taking inventory in the back room. See, she knocked on the open door. He turned. He looked at her with the wariness of a man who has been receiving visits from powerful people and has learned that those visits rarely leave him feeling better. See, Miss Whitlock, he said. Mr. Hendrick. She came in without being invited, which she did deliberately, not from rudeness, but because waiting for an invitation was the move of someone who needed permission. See, and she needed him to understand from the beginning of this conversation that she was not asking permission. See, she pulled a stool from the corner and sat down. I'd like to talk about the note Silas Crowder consolidated. See, Hendrick set down his clipboard. I can't discuss. See, I know he pressured you to change the terms, she said. See, the original terms on Gideon's account were reasonable for a long-term customer. See, the restructured terms were not. Something happened between March and August that changed your willingness to maintain the original arrangement. She paused. See, I'm not here to blame you for that. I'm here because the legal challenge is going to require testimony about the circumstances of the note's creation, and I want you to understand what testifying against us would mean. See, he looked at her carefully. Is that a threat? No, she said. See, it's information. There's a difference. She folded her hands in her lap. See, if Krell's challenge succeeds and the note stands as valid, Silas retains leverage over Iron Mesa through the debt. See, if it fails, and I believe it will fail, because the documentation we have is thorough, then Silas is exposed as having used your store as an instrument of fraudulent debt construction. See, that exposure lands on him, primarily, but it also raises questions about your role in the restructuring. See, not criminal questions, necessarily, but the kind of questions that affect a business's reputation in a town where reputation is most of what a merchant has. See, Hendrick said nothing. He was looking at his clipboard without seeing it. See, what I'm offering, she said, is the opportunity to get ahead of those questions. See, a statement from you, voluntary, describing the circumstances under which the terms were changed, including whatever pressure was applied, and by whom would establish your position as someone who acted under duress rather than in conspiracy. See, that's a fundamentally different legal and reputational situation. See, he looked up. He told me if I didn't change the terms, he'd start carrying supply himself and undercut my prices until I closed. See, I know, she said. She'd suspected it, but she hadn't known. See, but the fact that he'd said it told her she was right about the shape of it, and she needed him to keep going rather than retreat. See, and did you believe him? He's done it to others, Hendrik said. See, Morrison's Dry Goods, the grain merchant on the South Road. See, he undercut them both until they couldn't stay open. He paused. See, I have 6 employees. I have a wife who helps me keep the books. See, I have a 30-year operation. Yes, she said. I understand. See, the silence in the back room was the kind that comes after a person says something they've been carrying quietly for a long time. See, Hendrik set the clipboard on the shelf behind him and looked at his hands. See, if I give a statement, he said slowly, what happens to the note? See, the note gets folded into the broader challenge, she said. See, if the challenge succeeds, which I believe it will, with your statement as part of the record, the note is voided. See, Gideon's account returns to its original terms, which were reasonable. See, you lose the enhanced margin Silas was collecting through you, but you keep the account and you keep your business. She paused. See, and you stop being useful to a man who will discard you the moment you're no longer useful. See, Hendrik was quiet for a long time. Outside, Red Hollow was beginning its morning. She could hear the street sound starting, the early wagons, the particular quality of a small western town reluctantly waking up. See, he picked up the clipboard again, not to use it, but to have something in his hands. See, when do you need the statement? Within the week, she said. See, written and signed before a witness if possible. See, he nodded slowly. It was the nod she recognized, still working, not arrived, but moving in a direction. See, she stood and returned the stool to the corner. Miss Whitlock, he said as she reached the door. See, she turned. He put that tag on your trunk, Hendrik said. See, at the station I saw it. He looked at his hands. See, I thought it was I should have said something. At the time. See, I didn't. She looked at him for a moment. You're saying something now, she said. See, she left him with his clipboard and went back to Iron Mesa. See, Hendrik's statement arrived 4 days later, written in a precise, slightly trembling hand across 3 pages. See, witnessed by his wife and by the county clerk, who apparently had few objections to witnessing documents that were beginning to accumulate with some regularity in his office. See, the statement described the coercive arrangement in specific terms, dates, amounts, specific language Silas had used, and it was the kind of document that Krell, reviewing it for the first time, would understand immediately as the thing that changed the shape of the legal challenge from a technical argument about debt instruments into something broader and harder to manage. She sent a copy to Krell in Helena, not through the county attorney, but directly, through the postal office, with a cover letter that was 3 sentences long, a description of what the enclosure contained. A statement that duplicates were filed with the county clerk, and a sentence noting that additional witness statements were anticipated in the coming weeks. She did not threaten. She did not demand. She simply made it clear, in the language of someone who had read a great deal of legal correspondence and understood how information moved through legal proceedings, that the challenge's evidentiary foundation was considerably more substantial than the original filing had suggested. Krell withdrew from the case 17 days later. She heard about it from the county attorney, who told Gideon, who told her at the kitchen table that evening with an expression that was not quite disbelief, but was in that direction. Krell withdrew, he said, cited irreconcilable conflicts with the client's stated position and the available evidence. Which is legal language for I'm not going to lose a case this badly in a county where I might want to practice again, she said. Is that what it means? That's what it usually means. She closed the ledger she'd been working on. Which means Silas will either find different representation or he'll try a different approach entirely. Gideon looked at her across the table. You think he will? See, he hasn't gotten where he is by stopping when things don't go as planned. She thought about it. See, but his position is weaker than it was 2 months ago. See, he's lost the legal instrument. See, he's lost credibility with the buyers. Clark's consortium has been in correspondence with us about extending the relationship, which means other regional buyers are watching to see if that's the direction the market is moving. See, and he's lost the information advantage because now he knows we have documentation and we're willing to use it. She paused. See, men like Silas need the room to believe his arrangements are inevitable. See, once the room stops believing that, his power is mostly atmospheric. See, it exists because people act as if it exists. And if they stop acting that way, see, then it doesn't, she said simply. See, the winter settled hard over Red Hollow in December, the way Montana winters do without negotiation, without the gradual approach that other climates offer. See, it came as a single week of dropping temperatures, followed by snow that arrived with the conviction of something that intended to stay. See, Iron Mesa prepared for it the way ranches prepare for things they've been building toward for months, with the particular combination of physical labor and organized anxiety that is the honest face of readiness. See, the south pasture fence was finished by the first week of December. See, 6 months of complete rest had been planned for it. She and Hector had mapped the rotation protocol together, and it was written out and tacked to the barn wall, where anyone who needed it could find it. See, the main herd was managed through the north and east pastures on the feeding schedule she'd refined through the fall, and the winter hay supply purchased from 2 suppliers rather than 1. See, specifically to eliminate the leverage that single-source dependency creates, was stacked under a tarp that was actually large enough. See, she noticed the tarp. It was a small thing, but she noticed it. See, Cal had put it up himself without being asked. Sometime in late November, apparently having absorbed over 3 months the understanding that details like tarp size mattered more than they looked like they should. See, she didn't comment on it to him. See, she just noted it the way she noted the other things that were quietly becoming different about how Iron Mesa operated, the way Dolph had started writing down his weekly assessments of herd condition in a small notebook. See, the way Hector had begun teaching Cal-specific techniques for reading an animal's health from visual signs alone, passing on 30 years of knowledge to someone young enough to use it for a long time. See, these were not her direct contributions. She hadn't told Dolph to take notes or Hector to teach. See, but she understood that what she'd done over the fall had shifted something in the operation's character, had given it a reason to take itself seriously as a sustained enterprise, rather than a daily survival, and that this shift had its own. See, momentum now, running forward through the people who'd caught it without being told to. See, she thought about that sometimes, about the way good practices travel. See, about how 15 years of keeping careful records in Iowa had crossed 2,000 miles and changed the way a man in Montana kept a notebook. See, her father would have found that funny. He had been a modest man with genuinely modest ambitions, who'd kept those records because he was orderly by nature, and not because he'd imagined they would matter to anyone beyond the immediate season. See, she thought he would have been bewildered by Red Hollow and by Iron Mesa and by all of it, and she thought he would have been quietly pleased in the way modest people are when something they did without expectation turns out to have been useful. See, she missed him more in Montana than she'd expected to, and differently, not with the raw immediate grief of the first year, but with the dull, specific ache of recognizing his absence at the moments when she would most have liked to tell him something. See, Silas Crowder's second approach came in January. See, it was not legal, and it was not violent, it was social, which in some ways was harder to fight than either of the other things. See, he began quietly and systematically building a narrative. See, she heard it in pieces from different directions. From Nora, who still had connections in the territory and heard things through correspondence. From Greer, who passed through Red Hollow in January on his way north and stopped at Iron Mesa specifically to tell Gideon something he'd heard at the Billings market from the Red Hollow Courier's correspondent. who published a short piece that was carefully unattributable, but which contained characterizations of the auction incident that managed to suggest, without quite stating, that there had been questionable conduct on both sides of the floor that day. See, the narrative Silas was building was not dramatic. See, it was modest and plausible and specific, which made it more dangerous than a dramatic one would have been. See, it suggested, in various iterations, that Nora's documents were the product of a disgruntled former employee's grievance rather than a genuine account. See, that the challenged debt was a legal maneuver by a struggling operation rather than a legitimate dispute, and that Mara Whitlock was, at bottom, a woman of uncertain background who had attached herself to a vulnerable situation for reasons that a reasonable person might question. That last piece, the characterization of her, was the one she thought about most, not because it wounded her, but because she recognized its specific purpose. It was designed to reintroduce doubt about her credibility in the minds of the people whose business relationships she'd been building since November. If Clark's consortium began hearing that Mara Whitlock was a questionable figure, Clark would not pull the relationship. She was too professional for that, but she would become more cautious, more procedural, more likely to see distance as wisdom. She spent a week turning this around and looking at it from all angles. Then she did what she'd done at every other point in this situation. She went directly at the load-bearing point rather than trying to dismantle the whole structure. The load-bearing point of a reputation narrative was the people who repeated it. If the people who heard it from Silas decided not to repeat it, it died. The reason people repeated damaging narratives about someone they didn't know was that repeating it cost them nothing and confirmed a prior assumption. The way to interrupt that was to make the assumption fail, not by arguing against it, but by making it plainly wrong through evidence that the audience cared about more than the narrative. She wrote to Clark's consortium herself. Not a defensive letter, not addressing the narrative at all, but a detailed progress report on Iron Mesa's winter management, with the monthly herd assessments, the pasture rotation documentation, and a projection for the spring grazing season that she'd been building for 3 weeks. It was the kind of report that established its own argument without making one, because it was the work of someone who knew what they were doing and had the records to prove it. Clark replied within 2 weeks with a letter that was businesslike and warm in the specific way of someone who has been sent something they found useful. The reply contained, in its third paragraph, a brief reference to having heard some confused accounts of the autumn auction and finding them impossible to reconcile with the documentation Iron Mesa had consistently provided. Mara filed that letter beside the market receipt and the bank discharge, and the signed Hendricks statement in the cedar box she'd started keeping on the kitchen shelf. The cedar box was getting full. By February, Silas's second approach was producing diminishing returns. Not because people had stopped listening to him, his social position in Red Hollow meant people would always give him the courtesy of appearing to listen, but because the alternative narrative had enough weight of its own now to provide friction. Clark's letter had circulated, as she'd known it would, because Clark's consortium was exactly the kind of outside relationship that regional buyers paid attention to. Greer had mentioned to several people, apparently in passing, that the Iron Mesa documentation he'd reviewed before bidding was the most complete he'd encountered from an independent ranch operation in several years. Purcell's forward contract registered, public, visible was its own argument, because Purcell did not make forward contracts with operations he didn't believe in, and everyone in the regional cattle business knew that. None of this was dramatic. It didn't happen in a single moment in a crowded room. It happened in the slow, unglamorous way that real reputations are built through the accumulation of small, specific, verifiable things that eventually reach the weight of evidence rather than impression. She understood this, and she was patient with it, because patience was the thing she'd always had when others ran out. Spring came to Montana the way it comes after a hard winter tentatively, in small installments, retreating occasionally before committing. See, she walked the south pasture in March and looked at what 6 months of complete rest had done to the ground. See, and what she saw was not the dramatic transformation of story, it was subtle and honest, and exactly what she'd expected from the science of it. See, the root systems were recovering, the ground cover was thicker. See, the soil held moisture differently than it had the previous fall. See, it was, to a person who didn't know what to look at, unremarkable land. See, to her, it was the proof of something she'd believed was possible when it had looked like stubborn irrationality to the people around her. See, Hector came to stand beside her, the way he always appeared when something worth assessing was being assessed. See, he looked at the ground without speaking for a while. See, then he said, 8 weeks before this is ready to graze. See, 6, she said, if we're careful about rotation timing. See, he considered. 7, he said. Split the difference. See, 7. She agreed. She looked at the field. Your wife, the one with the New Mexico operation, did she rotate like this? See, she did. He was quiet. Took 3 years before the land really turned around. See, but it turned. And then? Then they had the best grazing land in the county for 20 years. He paused. See, she died before the end of it, the 20 years. See, she looked at him. He was looking at the field with the specific expression she'd come to understand, was the way Hector wore grief not on the outside of his face, but just behind it, where it was visible if you'd learned to look. See, I'm sorry, she said. She'd have liked this, he said. See, what you've done here, she'd have liked it. She didn't say anything. See, she just stood beside him and looked at the recovering field, and the cold March air moved across it steadily, and somewhere behind them, the ranch went about its business, and it was enough. See, it was Gideon who raised it. Not in a moment she'd have predicted or staged, not over the kitchen table during a ledger session, not after a significant event. See, but in the ordinary middle of an ordinary afternoon in late March, when they were fixing the gate that had been hanging crooked since the day she'd arrived. See, he had the gate off its hinges and was resetting the post, and she was holding the gate level while he worked, which required standing still for longer than she generally liked, and gave her nothing to do but think. See, she'd been thinking about Clark's spring contract terms, and about the south pasture rotation schedule, and about a letter she needed to write to the county attorney about the final disposition of the Crowder Note challenge. See, which had resolved 3 weeks earlier in the manner she'd predicted, the challenged debt voided, the original account terms restored, Silas's consolidated note rendered unenforceable. See, Silas had not filed a new challenge, and she did not believe he would, though she'd told Gideon to keep the documentation accessible regardless. See, the ranch gate's been crooked since before my father died, Gideon said from behind the post. See, I know, she said. I noticed it the day I arrived. See, I know you did. He was packing dirt around the base of the post, working with the methodical efficiency she'd come to find genuinely restful to be near. See, I've been meaning to fix it for 2 years. You had other things to address. See, I did. He tested the post's stability. Hand me the gate? See, she handed it up. He set it on the new hinges. Checked the swing. Checked the level. See, it was straight for the first time she could see it clearly, the line of it standing true against the sky. See, he came around to stand beside her and look at it. See, I was thinking, he said, about the ranch sign. See, the current ranch sign was a board nailed to the top of the gate frame with Iron Mesa burned into the wood and Rusk beneath it. See, and it had weathered to a gray that matched the winter sky and suggested an operation that had been here longer than it intended to stay. See, it needs replacing anyway, she said. It does. He was looking at the gate. See, I thought I'd have Hector make a new one. He does good woodwork. He paused. See, I thought the new one should have 2 names on it. See, she looked at the gate. She looked at him. He was still looking at the gate, with the careful sideways attention of someone presenting an idea they've thought about for a long time and are not certain will be received the way they mean it. See, what name, she said, not a question. Mine, he said. See, and yours if you want it there. She was quiet. The March air moved between them. See, Somewhere in the north pasture, one of the cattle made the low, distant sound that meant nothing was wrong, just the ordinary presence of living animals going about their business. See, as partners, she said. As partners, he confirmed. See, the ranch. Equal share. Your name on the deed. He looked at her then, directly, the way he looked at things he needed to be certain about. See, not because I owe you for what you've done. Because Iron Mesa is as much yours as it is mine and has been for some time, and the paperwork should reflect that. See, she thought about the first morning at the kitchen table. See, the ledger, the debt, the 11 weeks, the calf in the dark that hadn't given up. See, the night in the ravine country, the auction floor, and the silence that had lasted 20 seconds and felt like much longer. See, all of it accumulated in her memory, not as a narrative of triumph. It hadn't felt like triumph. It had felt like work. See, like the specific daily grind of refusing to let the wrong thing happen, but as the record of what two people had built when they decided to do it together. See, all right, she said. He looked at her. All right, the partnership, or... See, all right, the partnership, and all right, the name on the gate, she said. See, both. Something happened in his expression that was not quite a smile, but was the origin of one, the earliest stage of it, before it becomes visible as a smile, when it's still just a kind of illumination behind the eyes. See, I should tell you, he said carefully, that beyond the partnership I would like to, I mean to say that what I... He stopped. See, he looked faintly pained at himself, which she found more endearing than she'd expected to find anything. See, I have spent 6 months watching you work, he said. See, and I have not been indifferent to that, to you. See, I know, she said. He looked at her. You know, Gideon. She kept her face even, though something inside it was doing something she wasn't entirely in control of. See, I have been living in your house for 6 months. I am not unobservant. See, he considered this. Then I am open, she said carefully, to a conversation about what comes after the partnership is settled. She paused. See, one thing at a time. He was quiet for a moment. See, then the almost smile completed itself, and it was not charming or practiced, it was the real version. The kind that happens when something lands exactly right, and a person hasn't had time to arrange their face before it shows. See, one thing at a time, he agreed. She looked back at the gate, standing straight for the first time in years, and thought about what it would look like with 2 names on it. See, she thought it would look correct. It would look like what it was. See, Nora left in April. She had stayed 5 months, which had not been the plan, and which had become, in the quiet way of things that simply persist long enough to become true, genuinely useful to the ranch, and specifically to Mara, who had not expected to find Nora useful and had found her so anyway, in the particular way of someone who made themselves useful by showing up and doing the work without being asked to do it. See, on the morning Nora left, they stood at the stage stop in Red Hollow in the early light before the town was entirely awake, and Nora had her bag in both hands and the careful posture she'd always had. See, and she looked like a person who had been through a significant amount and was carrying it more honestly than she had before. See, I don't know what I'm going to do, Nora said after. See, I know, Mara said. That doesn't seem to bother you. See, it doesn't bother me for you, Mara said. Not knowing what comes next is not the same as having nothing to come back to. She paused. See, write to me when you get settled. The correspondence address is on the deed now, not just the ranch. See, Nora looked at her. My name, she said. See, both of ours. Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm glad you didn't take the ticket. See, so Ma said, most days. The stage arrived. See, Nora got on. Mara watched it go until it turned at the far end of the street and disappeared, and then she walked back to where she'd tied her horse and mounted and rode back toward Iron Mesa. See, into the spring morning that smelled of mud and new grass, and the particular promise that Montana makes in April when the winter finally believes it. See, the new gate sign was hung in May. See, Hector had made it from a piece of red cedar that he'd had in the workshop since fall, cured and ready, which suggested he had been planning this for longer than anyone had mentioned. See, it was solid and straightforward, no ornamentation, just clean burned letters on a piece of wood that would last 20 years without apology. The Iron Mesa Ranch stood at the top. Below it, on two equal lines, Rusk M. Whitlock. She stood in the yard and looked at it. Gideon stood beside her. Cal had apparently told Dolph and Hector, because both of them came out of the barn, and that a distance, with the expressions of people who wanted to see the sign go up, but weren't going to make a production of it. Sea level? Gideon asked Hector. Hector studied it. Left side, maybe a quarter inch. Leave it, Mara said. Gideon looked at her. It's not level. Nothing on this ranch was level when I arrived, she said. It doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be real. He looked at the sign. He looked at her. He didn't argue, which she appreciated. She went inside and took the red freight tag from the cedar box on the kitchen shelf. She looked at it for a moment, the soft, worn paper, the thick black letters that someone had written with specific intent to diminish, to assign a value of nothing to a person they'd never met. She thought about what she would say about it if someone asked her why she kept it, and she thought the truest answer was the simplest one. Because the people who try to tell you what you're worth always tell you more about themselves than they do about you. And because it was useful to have the proof in your hand that someone else's assessment of your value had turned out to be wrong. She went to the wall beside the kitchen window and hung it on the nail she'd put there weeks ago, next to the frame that held the paid mortgage discharge and the bank's credit letter and the forward contract registration receipt. All of it together in a row like the chapters of a single argument. The red tag was the first chapter. The rest of it was the answer. By summer, Iron Mesa's recovering herd had grown in number and in quality by measures that produced, when she showed them to Forsyth at the bank in June, the specific expression of a man who is pleased to have his professional judgment confirmed. The operating line of credit was agreed upon in that meeting. At terms she had negotiated over 2 sessions that Forsyth had later described to Gideon as the most methodical negotiations he'd encountered in 30 years of banking, and he had not said it with displeasure. Silas Crowder was still in Red Hollow. She had never expected him to leave. He had reduced his trading activity significantly. Since January, some of the buyers who had stepped off his board at the auction had not returned. And others had renegotiated their arrangements from positions of greater independence than they'd held before. His supply operation still ran. His influence in certain quarters of the town was still real. He was not destroyed, and she would not have said he was. He was diminished, and the specific nature of the diminishment was that the room had stopped believing his arrangements were inevitable, which meant his power existed now, only where people chose to let it exist, rather than everywhere, by default. That was enough. She didn't need him ruined. She'd never needed him ruined. She'd needed Iron Mesa to survive, and it had, and everything else was consequence rather than purpose. She saw him once in June, at the far end of the market building during a routine sale day. He saw her too. He held her gaze for a moment with an expression that she couldn't entirely read, not the cold smile of before, something different, something she thought might be closer to recognition than he'd ever shown her before. The recognition of a person who had underestimated something and was aware of it now, not with shame exactly, but with the particular permanent knowledge of a mistake that cost real money. She nodded at him, once, the way you nod at someone in a room when acknowledgement is appropriate and nothing more than acknowledgement is required. He nodded back. She went to check on the lot. In the evenings that summer, when the work was done and the light held long over the Montana hills, in the way it only holds in those months, she and Gideon would sometimes sit at the kitchen table and not discuss anything in particular. Not the ledger, not the pasture rotation, not the Purcell contract, or the bank or the county attorney, or any of the machinery of keeping a ranch alive. Just the quiet, which was different from the many quiets she'd sat in, since arriving, different from the survival quiet of November and the watchful quiet of December and the cautious quiet of February. This was the kind of quiet that didn't require monitoring. The kind that meant nothing was about to go wrong. See, she had not expected to like Montana. She had expected to work in Montana, which was a different thing entirely. See, and which had been all she'd had in mind when she'd folded herself onto that train in Davenport with $112 in her boot, and the practical hope of someone who doesn't permit herself more than she can reasonably expect. See, what she had was considerably more than she'd permitted herself. See, on a warm evening in July, Gideon looked across the table at her and said, "You never told me what you thought when you saw the tag." See, she thought about it honestly. "My first reaction was almost funny," she said. See, because it was so specific. Useless. Not damaged, not returned goods, not anything that implied something had gone wrong. See, just useless. Like the worst they could imagine saying was that I didn't matter. See, and what did you think after that? She looked at the window, where the summer light was doing the thing it did in July, going gold and staying that way for longer than light ought to be able to. See, I thought that someone had worked quite hard to make sure I felt like nothing before I'd even set foot in the town, she said. See, and that working that hard to diminish someone is the action of a person who's genuinely worried about what they're capable of. She paused. See, it was almost a compliment. Gideon was quiet for a moment. See, he was right to be worried, he said. She looked at him. See, he was looking back at her with the expression that had no name she'd found for it, the one that showed up in the specific moments when he was looking at something he valued without performing the valuing, just doing it plainly without ornament. See, we both were, she said. That's the point. Outside, through the kitchen window, the new gate was visible at the end of the yard in the evening light, straight-sided and solid, with the two names on it reading the same size in the same letters. See, facing the road where anyone coming in could see them. See, the woman who'd been told she was worth nothing had decided that wasn't true on a train platform in a town she didn't know, in front of people who didn't know her, in the moment when the easiest thing in the world would have been to agree. See, she hadn't agreed. That was the whole of it, really. See, that was the decision every other decision had followed from. See, not a grand gesture, not a speech, not a proclamation, just a woman picking up her own trunk and choosing not to leave, because someone else's assessment of her worth had not yet been proven right, and she intended to keep it that way. See, it hadn't been smooth. Nothing worth building ever is. See, there had been sick calves and cut fences and cold mornings, and men who said she'd be gone in 2 weeks, and a winter that didn't ask permission, and a man in an expensive suit who had paid $40 to make her feel like nothing and watched it. See, cost him considerably more than $40 in the end. See, there had also been a blanket on a bed that nobody claimed to have left, and coffee made before anyone asked. See, and an old man who sang off-key in the early morning, and a young one who drove fence posts deeper when he was told to, and a woman who got on a stage with documents she'd carried across 2 states because eventually the carrying became necessary. See, there had been a kitchen table and a ledger, and a man who listened with the complete attention of someone who intends to remember, and a gate that finally stood straight. See, and a name written on a board of red cedar in letters burned deep enough to last. See, the world was not particularly interested in making things easy for people without the right connections, or the right circumstances, or the right introduction. See, she had always known that. It had never been the point. The point was what you built anyway.